Have you ever noticed that the greatest monuments of the ancient world rarely answer the questions they inspire? The larger they are, the quieter they become. A towering fortress tells us nothing about the fear that led to its construction. A vast underground complex reveals no reason for why thousands of people carved it into solid rock. A forgotten city can survive for thousands of years without explaining why it was suddenly abandoned. Stone preserves shape but not intention. Time protects structures yet quietly erases the people who understood them. That is why the ancient world remains so compelling. Every ruin is a contradiction. It stands before us as undeniable proof that something extraordinary happened here, while refusing to explain exactly what that was. And perhaps that is why, even after centuries of exploration, the greatest ancient mysteries continue to feel as if they are waiting for someone to ask the right question. Stretching across the brutal hills of northern Britain, the ancient Roman frontier known as Castle still hides engineering mysteries that modern archaeologists struggle to fully explain. Built nearly 2,000 years ago along Hadrian's Wall, these small stone forts were positioned with astonishing precision across more than 117 kilometers of uneven terrain. No satellites, no lasers, no engines. Yet the system functioned with a level of coordination that resembles military infrastructure from far later civilizations. The remains of the castles became clearer during large-scale surveys in the 18th and 19th centuries, when antiquarians and military engineers began mapping Hadrian's Wall in detail. Excavations revealed that the structures were not random guard posts, but part of a mathematically organized defensive network. Later digs uncovered drainage systems, standardized barracks, signal points, workshops, animal pens, and roads integrated directly into the wall itself. Early excavations mainly exposed collapsed stone walls and gateways. Later discoveries revealed underground drainage channels designed to survive northern Britain's wet climate. 20th century excavations uncovered evidence of rapid rebuilding phases, suggesting the wall was continuously modified over centuries. Modern LIDAR scanning and aerial imaging later revealed how carefully the castles were aligned with visibility corridors across hills and valleys. Some excavations even uncovered traces of repaired stonework, showing that Roman engineers maintained the system with long-term strategic planning rather than temporary military occupation. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding the castles is the precision of their placement. Most were built almost exactly 1 Roman mile apart, roughly 1.48 kilometers, across landscapes filled with cliffs, marshes, rocky ridges and steep valleys. Modern surveying teams using GPS have noted how difficult it would be to maintain such consistency even today under similar terrain conditions. The Romans used tools like the groma for straight-line alignment and the corobes for levelling ground. But those instruments alone do not fully explain how engineers maintained near-uniform spacing across more than 117 kilometers. A small directional error at the beginning could have created massive deviations later, yet many sections remain astonishingly accurate. Researchers comparing Hadrian's Wall with other ancient fortification systems discovered something unusual. Roman alignment accuracy on some sections rivals later medieval military projects built more than 1,000 years afterward. Some stretches deviate only slightly despite terrain that should have forced major inconsistencies. Northern Britain experiences heavy rainfall, freezing winters, and repeated freeze-thaw cycles that normally destroy ancient masonry over time. Yet parts of several castle foundations remain stable after nearly 2 millennia. Excavations revealed that Roman engineers layered crushed stone, compacted gravel, and drainage channels beneath foundations to reduce water pressure buildup. In some locations, the construction method changes depending on local geology, suggesting Roman engineers adjusted designs according to soil conditions rather than using one universal blueprint. This is particularly surprising because geotechnical engineering as a formal science would not emerge until many centuries later. Some modern civil engineers studying the wall argue that the Romans possessed a highly practical understanding of load distribution, erosion control and drainage behaviour acquired through military construction experience across the empire. Comparisons with medieval castles in Britain show that many later fortifications actually suffered worse structural degradation despite being built more than 1,000 years later. This raises ongoing debates about whether Roman construction standards in frontier regions were far more advanced than traditionally believed. Another unresolved mystery is how efficiently the mile castles functioned as a communication network. Between the larger forts stood smaller watchtowers called turrets, positioned close enough for rapid visual signalling. Modern terrain simulations demonstrate that many of these locations maintain direct lines of sight through narrow valleys and over hill ridges with remarkable precision. Some archaeologists believe the wall operated like a giant ancient warning system, capable of transmitting alerts across huge distances in minutes, using smoke, fire, or reflected light. What makes this extraordinary is the level of geographic planning involved. Roman engineers appear to understand not only visibility but also atmospheric conditions, elevation advantages, and long-distance signal reliability. Several placements seem intentionally optimized for communication efficiency rather than simple defensive convenience. Military historians have compared the system to later beacon chain networks used in medieval China and even early modern Europe, yet Hadrian's Wall predates many of those systems by centuries. Perhaps the most shocking aspect of the mile castles is the speed of construction. Historians estimate that Hadrian's Wall and its associated defences were built largely within less than a decade during the reign of Hadrian in the 2nd century AD, that required quarrying, transporting, shaping and assembling millions of stones without mechanised cranes, engines or industrial machinery. Some stone blocks fit together with surprising precision, suggesting highly organised stone-cutting operations and standardised measurement systems. Archaeological studies indicate that different Roman legions constructed different sectors of the wall, yet the final structure still maintained remarkable consistency. This level of coordination resembles modern industrial logistics more than traditional ancient construction. Some modern estimates suggest thousands of labourers, soldiers, engineers, blacksmiths, surveyors and transport workers would have needed to operate simultaneously under centralised planning. Maintaining food supplies, tools, stone deliveries and construction schedules across hostile frontier territory would itself have been an immense logistical achievement. Excavations reveal that mile castles were not completely identical. Archaeologists identified long-axis and short-axis designs, depending on the orientation of internal structures. This suggests different Roman legions followed slightly different engineering traditions while constructing separate sections. What remains mysterious is how the overall network still functioned so uniformly despite these variations. Roads connected smoothly, defensive spacing remained consistent, signal visibility was maintained, structural integration stayed efficient across the entire frontier. This combination of flexibility and standardization resembles modern modular military infrastructure. Instead of rigid duplication, Roman engineers may have used adaptable templates, capable of adjusting to terrain while preserving overall system performance. The mile castles were not static structures abandoned after construction. Excavations show repeated repairs, reinforcements, and redesigns over centuries. Some gates were narrowed, walls thickened, and internal layouts modified during changing military conditions. Archaeologists also discovered evidence that certain mile castles were later reused for storage, trade monitoring, or temporary civilian occupation after military priorities shifted. This adaptability suggests Hadrian's Wall functioned less like a simple barrier and more like a dynamic frontier management system. Some historians compare it to a living military organism constantly evolving in response to political threats, migration pressures, and environmental changes. Do you think the greatest Roman technology was not their weapons or buildings, but their ability to organize thousands of people into a system so advanced it still survives today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Wind from the Atlantic crashes into the southern coast of Spain at nearly 80 kilometers per hour. Salt hangs permanently in the air. Earthquakes have repeatedly shaken the coastline for centuries. Yet beside the Strait of Gibraltar, the ruins of Baelo Claudia still stand after almost 2,000 years. What survives there is not simply a Roman city. It is evidence of an industrial system so advanced that some archaeologists believe parts of its engineering knowledge were lost after the fall of Rome. Baelo Claudia was located near modern Tarifa in southern Spain, directly facing North Africa across the narrowest point of the Mediterranean gateway. The city flourished between the 1st century BCE and the 2nd century CE, becoming one of the Roman Empire's most important centres for garum production. Garum was a fermented fish sauce considered one of the most valuable food products in the ancient world. Roman elites paid enormous prices for high-quality versions, and amphorae stamped from Baelo Claudia have been discovered across the Mediterranean, from Gaul to the Middle East. The ruins were first systematically identified during the 19th century, but major excavations accelerated in the early 20th century under French and Spanish archaeologists. What initially appeared to be a small coastal settlement quickly revealed something far more complex. Beneath layers of sand and collapsed masonry were massive industrial districts, hydraulic systems, fish processing factories, drainage networks, temples, markets, and one of the most sophisticated food production infrastructures ever discovered from the Roman world. The greatest mystery surrounding Baelo Claudia is not its size. It is the level of technological adaptation visible throughout the site. The city existed in one of the harshest construction environments imaginable. Saltwater corrosion destroys most coastal structures over time. Modern reinforced concrete exposed to marine environments often begins serious deterioration within 50 to 100 years due to chloride penetration and steel oxidation. Yet large portions of Baelo Claudia's industrial basins, waterproof coatings, and hydraulic structures survived nearly 20 centuries. Researchers studying Roman concrete at coastal sites found that ancient builders often used volcanic ash mixed with lime and seawater to trigger pozzolanic reactions. These reactions formed rare minerals such as aluminum topomorite crystals, which strengthened the concrete over time instead of weakening it. Modern studies published on Roman marine concrete show that some ancient mixtures actually become more durable after centuries of seawater exposure. Baelo Claudia appears to contain similar engineering principles, despite being located far from the volcanic regions normally associated with Roman pozzolana. The fish processing districts are among the most disturbing and technologically puzzling discoveries. Archaeologists uncovered dozens of salting vats arranged in organized production lines. Some complexes contained multiple fermentation tanks, positioned side by side with narrow channels for liquid transfer and waste removal. The layout resembles industrial food processing facilities developed many centuries later. Each vat was lined with waterproof mortar, capable of resisting salt saturation, bacterial decay, and constant temperature variation. Even more mysterious is the precision of the floor gradients. Several tanks were engineered with slight inclines that allowed liquids to drain naturally, while preventing overflow contamination between batches. Modern surveys revealed slope variations measured in only a few millimeters across several meters. No advanced laser equipment existed. No steel precision tools existed. Yet the consistency of these angles suggests extremely refined surveying techniques. Some historians estimate Bailo Claudia processed thousands of tons of tuna during peak production seasons. The city sat directly beside migratory routes used by Atlantic bluefin tuna entering the Mediterranean. Adult bluefin tuna can exceed 600 kilograms in weight and swim across entire ocean basins. Roman fishermen exploited these migrations using elaborate net systems called almadrabas, a technique still partially used in southern Spain today. But catching fish was only the beginning. The real mystery was preservation. Garum production required controlled fermentation of fish entrails, blood, flesh, and salt over extended periods. Without proper management, the mixture would become lethally toxic rather than edible. Yet Roman writers describe premium garum as smooth, aromatic, and highly refined. At Bailo Claudia, archaeologists discovered that fermentation vats were positioned to maximize solar exposure during cooler periods while minimizing overheating during the hottest hours of the day. Some vats appear partially shielded from prevailing ocean winds, reducing evaporation instability. This suggests Roman producers possessed an empirical understanding of microbial fermentation centuries before microbiology existed. Modern food science recognizes fermentation as an extremely delicate biochemical process. Temperature changes of only a few degrees can drastically alter bacterial activity, enzyme breakdown, and toxin formation. Salt concentration must remain within carefully controlled ranges. Too little salt allows dangerous pathogens to dominate. Too much salt halts fermentation entirely. Yet Bailo Claudia operated this process on an industrial scale. Chemical residue analysis from several vats detected complex organic compounds associated with amino acid breakdown and protein hydrolysis, exactly the reactions responsible for umami flavor enhancement in modern fermented foods like fish sauce and soy sauce. In other words, Roman producers were unintentionally manipulating biochemical reactions using practical knowledge accumulated through generations. Some researchers compare garum factories at Bailo Claudia to primitive biochemical laboratories. The engineering behind sanitation is equally remarkable. Ancient industrial cities usually suffered catastrophic waste problems, but Bailo Claudia incorporated drainage channels, sediment traps, freshwater distribution systems, and wastewater separation networks. Certain channels were built with gradients optimized for self-cleaning water flow, reducing sediment accumulation without mechanical intervention. Water management was critical because the region itself was relatively dry. Maintaining industrial-scale fish processing required enormous quantities of fresh water for washing, salting preparation, and urban consumption. The existence of dedicated aqueduct systems feeding a coastal industrial centre demonstrates a logistical sophistication far beyond what many people associate with the ancient world. Then came the earthquakes. Geological evidence suggests Bailo Claudia suffered repeated seismic events between the 2nd and 4th centuries CE. Many buildings collapsed, yet numerous walls partially survived rather than shattering completely. Some foundations appear capable of distributing stress unevenly across layered stone structures. Certain researchers speculate Roman builders may have intuitively incorporated primitive seismic resistance principles through flexible mortar distribution and mass balancing. This becomes even stranger when comparing Bailo Claudia to later medieval structures built in similar environments. Many younger constructions deteriorated faster, despite being built over 1,000 years later. The city's decline remains debated. Earthquakes likely damaged major infrastructure. Economic instability weakened trade networks. Political fragmentation within the Western Roman Empire reduced industrial coordination. Gradually, Bailo Claudia was abandoned and consumed by sand from the surrounding coast. Do you think the Romans truly lost advanced engineering knowledge? Or are there still ancient technologies we have not fully rediscovered yet? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Low, almost invisible against endless rice fields in West Java, the Batu Jaya temple complex does not look like a monumental achievement. There are no towering stone pyramids, no mountain-carved sanctuaries, no massive megaliths defying gravity. Instead, what remains are low brick mounds, subtle, fragmented, and easily overlooked. Yet beneath this apparent simplicity lies one of the most technically puzzling archaeological sites in Southeast Asia. The greatest mystery is not what was built, but how it survived. Constructed between the 5th and 7th centuries CE, likely during the era of the Tarumanagara, Batu Jaya exists in an environment where architecture should fail. Flood-prone plains, unstable alluvial soil, and constant humidity. And yet, after more than 1,500 years, its structures persist. Not intact, but undeniably present, defying the expected lifespan of their materials. Compared to monumental stone complexes like Borobudur, built centuries later on stable volcanic hills, Batu Jaya represents a paradox. A fragile technology, enduring where stronger systems might not. The rediscovery of Batu Jaya was not a dramatic archaeological breakthrough, but a gradual realization. Throughout the early 20th century, local farmers repeatedly encountered bricks, pottery fragments, and structural remnants beneath their fields. These findings were initially dismissed as isolated debris. It was not until systematic surveys in the 1980s that archaeologists began mapping the area and identified over 30 distinct mounds, known locally as unia. Excavations revealed foundations, stair structures, and remnants of stupas, including the now famous Segaran site. Radiocarbon dating of organic inclusions within the bricks suggested a construction period ranging from approximately the 5th to 7th centuries CE. This predates the peak of classical Javanese temple construction, raising an important question. Was Batu Jaya an early experimental phase of Buddhist architecture in the region, or something entirely different? Unlike centralized complexes, its structures are distributed across several square kilometers, with no clear urban core, defensive walls, or royal compounds suggesting a function that does not align with typical ancient city planning. At first glance, Batu Jaya seems to represent an early form of Buddhist architecture, simple stupas constructed with limited technological means. However, several inconsistencies complicate this interpretation. Compared to Borobudur, which contains over 2,000 relief panels and more than 500 Buddha statues, Batu Jaya presents minimal iconography. The lack of detailed carvings or symbolic narratives suggests either a different ritual function or a stage of development not yet fully defined. Spatially, the structures are dispersed rather than centralized. Some are separated by hundreds of meters, forming what appears to be a decentralized ritual landscape rather than a unified ceremonial complex. Stratigraphic evidence further reveals that multiple structures were built atop earlier ones, indicating repeated reconstruction over extended periods. This layered construction suggests continuity, an evolving system, rather than a single architectural event. Yet no written records or inscriptions have been found to explain its purpose, leaving only physical patterns without explanatory context. The most critical and least understood aspect of Batu Jaya lies in its material composition. Unlike the volcanic stone used in Borobudur, or the sandstone of Angkor Wat, Batu Jaya is constructed almost entirely from fired clay bricks. Under normal environmental conditions, such materials are inherently vulnerable. In tropical climates characterized by high humidity, seasonal flooding, and microbial activity, clay bricks typically degrade within a few hundred years. However, Batu Jaya's bricks have endured for more than 15 centuries. Scientific analyses reveal that these bricks are not compositionally ordinary. Many samples contain significant quantities of rice husk, an organic additive that burns out during firing, leaving behind a network of microscopic voids. These voids may function as internal channels, allowing moisture to diffuse rather than accumulate, thereby reducing structural stress. In addition, elevated silica content has been detected in several samples. Silica-rich compositions can enhance resistance to chemical weathering and increase mechanical stability under fluctuating moisture conditions. Together, these properties suggest a material system optimized not for maximum hardness, but for environmental compatibility. From a comparative perspective, this is significant. Roman concrete, known for its durability, relies on volcanic ash to create a pozzolanic reaction that strengthens over time. Batu Jaya, by contrast, appears to achieve long-term stability through porosity control and organic integration, an entirely different approach to material engineering. While Roman techniques are well documented, no equivalent records exist for Batu Jaya. This raises the possibility that early builders in Java developed an empirical understanding of material science that has since been lost. Whether this knowledge was intentional or the result of iterative experimentation remains unclear, but the outcome suggests a level of technical adaptation not typically associated with early brick architecture. Equally perplexing is the geotechnical context of Batu Jaya. The site is located on an ancient floodplain composed of soft alluvial sediments, a substrate that modern engineering would classify as highly unstable. Construction on such terrain typically requires deep foundations, soil stabilization, or drainage systems, none of which have been clearly identified at Batu Jaya. There are no stone platforms, no deep piling systems, and no visible hydraulic infrastructure capable of long-term water management. Yet the structures have not undergone catastrophic collapse. One proposed explanation is load distribution. The use of layered brick foundations may have spread structural weight over a larger surface area, reducing localized adduct on the soil. Another hypothesis suggests the existence of organic base layers, possibly bamboo or timber grids that have decomposed over time, leaving no direct archaeological trace. Both theories remain speculative due to the absence of preserved evidence. What is clear is that the builders operated within a highly dynamic environment, subject to periodic flooding and soil movement, and yet achieved a degree of structural persistence that challenges modern assumptions about early construction capabilities. When compared to other ancient sites, Batu Jaya stands out not for its scale, but for its contradiction. Monumental complexes like Borobudur and Angkor Wat demonstrate advanced geometry, symbolic complexity, and large-scale coordination. Batu Jaya, in contrast, employs minimalistic forms and modest materials, yet its survival in a hostile environment suggests a different kind of sophistication, one rooted not in grandeur, but in adaptation. In engineering terms, Batu Jaya may represent a system optimized for environmental integration rather than resistance. If so, it challenges the conventional assumption that ancient technological advancement is always expressed through monumentality. If you were tasked with building a structure to survive for over 1,000 years in a floodplain, using only natural materials, what principles would you rely on, and could you recreate what Batu Jaya achieved? on a windswept plateau nearly 1,000 meters above sea level in northern Spain, a small Celtiberian city once forced the Roman Republic into one of the longest and most humiliating wars in its history. Numantia was not protected by giant pyramids or impossible megaliths. Its greatest mystery was something far more dangerous, a level of military engineering, logistics, and metallurgy that seemed completely out of proportion for an Iron Age tribal settlement. For almost 20 years, Rome could not break it. The ruins of Numantia were identified in the 19th century after years of debate over its true location. Systematic excavations began in 1905 under German archaeologist Adolf Schulten, whose work uncovered defensive walls, streets, weapons, storage pits, and traces of one of the largest Roman siege operations ever attempted against a single city. To understand why Numantia became legendary, the scale of Rome must be understood first. By the 2nd century BCE, Rome had already defeated Carthage, conquered much of the Mediterranean, and fielded professional armies capable of engineering roads, bridges, siege towers, and massive fortifications across entire continents. Roman military discipline was so effective that most tribal settlements collapsed rapidly once surrounded, yet Numantia resisted for nearly 2 decades. Ancient Roman sources describe repeated Roman defeats, failed assaults, destroyed supply lines, and commanders humiliated by a settlement that may have contained only 4,000 to 8,000 inhabitants. Some estimates place the defending force at barely 2,000 warriors during certain periods of the conflict. That imbalance is staggering. Modern comparisons help reveal how unusual this was. It would be similar to a small, isolated mountain town repeatedly defeating offensives from the strongest military power on Earth. Rome eventually became so frustrated that it sent Scipio Aemilianus, the same commander who destroyed Carthage in 146 BCE, specifically to end the Numantine resistance once and for all. Even then, he avoided direct assault. That decision alone reveals how dangerous Numantia had become. Unlike famous ancient cities surrounded by gigantic stone walls, Numantia relied heavily on terrain optimization. The city stood on elevated ground between river valleys near the upper Duero basin. Archaeological studies show that its fortifications were integrated directly into the natural topography. Instead of relying on monument-sized walls, the defenders created narrow access corridors, steep approach angles, and layered defensive positions that forced attackers into exposed kill zones. This type of terrain warfare resembles much later military principles used in medieval hill forts and even modern mountain defense systems. Excavations revealed strategically positioned walls following slope geometry, controlled entry points, elevated observation lines, and defensive structures adapted to natural cliffs and ravines. What makes this mysterious is the sophistication of the planning. The Celtiberians were traditionally described by Roman writers as loosely organized tribal groups, yet Numantia demonstrates an advanced understanding of defensive architecture and battlefield control. Some archaeologists compare aspects of the site to Gallic hill fort engineering, but Numantia appears unusually optimized for long-term resistance. Its builders understood something critical. A fortress does not need massive walls if the landscape itself becomes the weapon. When Scipio arrived around 134 BCE, he abandoned the standard Roman approach of direct attack. Instead, he launched one of the most ambitious siege operations of the ancient world. Roman forces constructed multiple military camps, ditches, towers, wooden barriers, fortified walls, and river blockades. The encirclement stretched roughly 9 kilometers around the city. Some historians estimate the Roman force may have exceeded 50,000 soldiers and auxiliaries during parts of the campaign. That means Rome used an army potentially larger than the entire population of Numantia itself. But the real mystery is not the Roman siege. It is how Numantia survived it. Archaeological evidence suggests the inhabitants endured conditions that should have caused collapse much earlier. Excavations uncovered underground storage pits, grain reserves, and organized urban layouts suggesting highly efficient rationing systems. Researchers still debate several unresolved questions. Did Numantia possess hidden supply tunnels? Were there concealed external trade routes? Did the city develop advanced food preservation methods? How did such a small population manage resources so effectively under total isolation? Some storage structures discovered at the site indicate careful temperature control using underground chambers. Similar systems appear in other Iron Age settlements, but Numantia's apparent endurance suggests logistics far beyond what Rome expected. This transforms the story from simple warfare into something deeper, a battle of engineering, endurance, and systems management. One reason Rome struggled was because the Numantians refused to fight conventionally. Roman armies excelled in organized battlefield formations. Their strength depended on discipline, formation cohesion, and large-scale logistics. The defenders of Numantia attacked those exact weaknesses. Historical accounts describe ambush tactics, rapid raids, night attacks, supply disruption, hit-and-run warfare, and terrain manipulation. These tactics resemble modern asymmetric warfare more than traditional ancient battles. Instead of confronting Roman legions head-on, the Celtiberians forced Rome into a prolonged war of exhaustion. Some military historians argue that Numantia demonstrated an advanced understanding of strategic attrition centuries before such concepts became formalized in military theory. This is one of the most overlooked mysteries surrounding the city. Numantia may represent evidence that Iron Age tribal societies possessed far more sophisticated military intelligence than Roman sources admitted. Among all the mysteries surrounding Numantia, the most technically fascinating may be its metallurgy. Roman armies eventually adopted weapons inspired by Iberian blades. The famous Gladius Hispaniensis, one of Rome's deadliest swords, was influenced heavily by Hispano-Celtic designs developed in Iberia. This is extraordinary. Rome, the dominant military power of the ancient world, was copying weapon technology from the very people it considered barbarians. Archaeometallurgical studies suggest Celtiberian smiths achieved surprisingly high-quality steel production for the period. Analyses of surviving blades from Iberian regions reveal strong carbon distribution, flexible yet durable structures, advanced forging consistency, and an excellent balance between hardness and elasticity. In practical terms, this meant the swords could absorb impact without shattering while maintaining sharp cutting edges. That balance is extremely difficult to achieve without careful heat control. The mystery is how Celtiberian blacksmiths managed it. Iron production in the 2nd century BCE normally suffered from inconsistent furnace temperatures and impurities. Yet some Iberian weapons demonstrate metallurgical qualities far ahead of expectations for decentralized tribal societies. Several theories attempt to explain this. Unusually rich local ore deposits, inherited metallurgical traditions from earlier Mediterranean trade networks, multi-stage forging techniques, and advanced quenching and tempering methods. But no complete consensus exists. Experimental archaeologists attempting to recreate Celtiberian blades discovered that producing similar flexibility requires remarkably precise temperature management. Even small errors during forging can ruin the metal structure completely. Some reconstructed Iberian swords performed so effectively in tests that researchers compared them favorably against early Roman weapon designs. This creates an uncomfortable historical question. If Celtiberian metallurgy was this advanced, how much ancient technological knowledge has been underestimated simply because it belonged to cultures outside the major empires? Numantia may not have possessed giant monuments, but it may have possessed something even more dangerous: industrial knowledge capable of rivaling Rome itself. After months of complete encirclement, starvation finally overwhelmed Numantia in 133 BCE. Ancient accounts claim many inhabitants chose death over surrender, with some reportedly burning their possessions and parts of the city rather than becoming Roman slaves. Archaeological evidence confirms intense destruction layers across the settlement, but even here, mysteries remain. Excavations suggest multiple burn phases instead of a single fire, implying the city may have endured repeated destruction and rapid reconstruction throughout the war. Some surviving structures also reveal mixed wood and stone construction techniques that may have improved flexibility and shock absorption during attacks. Once again, Numantia appears far more technically advanced than expected for an Iron Age tribal settlement. Do you think Numantia was simply a small tribal city, or proof that ancient civilizations possessed technologies and military knowledge far beyond what history admits? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Southwestern Turkey, near the modern province of Burdur, lies a Neolithic settlement dated between approximately 7,000 to 5,600 BCE. By conventional archaeological models, this period represents early farming communities, small, experimental, and technologically limited. Yet Hassilar does not behave like an early experiment. It behaves like a refined system, and the most unsettling detail is not its age but its precision. Ceramics with controlled firing, architecture with repeatable standards, and symbolic art with consistent form, none of which appear accidental, instead suggesting knowledge that seems too organized, too optimized, and too early. When compared to contemporary sites across Mesopotamia and Anatolia, Hassilar appears to compress centuries of development into a much earlier phase, raising a question that remains unresolved: was this a local anomaly, or a fragment of a larger, lost knowledge system? Hassilar was systematically excavated in the late 1950s by British archaeologist James Mellart, the same figure associated with Çatalhöyük. And what emerged from the excavation was not a single settlement, but a sequence of multiple stratified layers indicating long-term occupation. Each layer revealed variations in construction techniques, pottery styles, and social organization, pointing to gradual development over time. Yet what surprised researchers was not the presence of development, but its starting point. Because even the earliest layers already displayed structured housing clusters, advanced ceramic production, and repeated symbolic motifs. While radiocarbon dating confirmed the age and firmly placed Hassilar within early Neolithic timelines, technologically it appeared closer to later Chalcolithic cultures, creating a discrepancy that has never been fully reconciled. Among all findings, Hassilar's ceramics remain the most difficult to explain within a linear technological model, because these vessels are not crude containers but engineered objects, beginning with their geometric precision, where patterns are arranged with near-perfect bilateral symmetry, lines maintain consistent thickness, curvature follows predictable arcs, and spacing remains uniform across the surface. And achieving this without rotational tools or measurement instruments implies either extraordinary manual control or a standardized production system that has left no clear archaeological trace. Beyond geometry, the surface finish reveals another layer of complexity, as many vessels exhibit a highly polished, almost burnished exterior produced through controlled abrasion techniques, with microscopic analysis suggesting repeated smoothing cycles using fine-grained materials, a level of effort that exceeds basic functional needs and points toward deliberate refinement, while the most critical factor lies in firing control. where the red and black color contrasts are not decorative accidents but the result of precise oxygen regulation during firing, with oxidizing conditions producing red hematite tones and reducing conditions creating darker carbon-rich surfaces. And experimental archaeology demonstrates that achieving such effects requires stable kiln temperatures, likely exceeding several hundred degrees Celsius, carefully managed airflow and fuel distribution, and precise timing sequences to regulate oxygen exposure. Yet no fully developed kiln infrastructure has been definitively identified at Hasalar, creating a paradox in which the outputs suggest advanced kilns, while the physical evidence suggests simpler systems. When compared to early Neolithic ceramics from the Levant, which often display uneven firing and irregular decoration, Hasalar pottery aligns more closely with later Bronze Age standards, representing not an incremental improvement, but a categorical leap. And further analysis of ceramic shards reveals relatively consistent wall thickness within narrow tolerances, indicating a level of process control rather than random craftsmanship, and suggesting that production may have been guided by shared technical knowledge or early specialization, ultimately shifting the question from how these ceramics were made to why such precision was pursued at all, because from a purely survival-based perspective, simple containers would have been sufficient. Yet Hasalar ceramics instead point toward aesthetic standardization, symbolic communication, or participation in a broader cultural or economic network, reinforcing the possibility that Hasalar was not an isolated settlement, but part of a larger information system, transmitting techniques, patterns, and meaning across space and time. The settlement's architecture appears simple at first glance, consisting of mud brick walls, plastered interiors, and flat surfaces, yet this simplicity conceals a deeper complexity, because mud brick is inherently vulnerable to erosion from moisture and temperature variation. And despite this, the wall outlines and floor plans at Hasalar remain clearly identifiable after millennia, implying the use of multi-layer plastering techniques that improved resistance, possible additives in the mud mixture that enhanced cohesion, and maintenance cycles that extended structural lifespan. And when compared to similar mud brick settlements in early Mesopotamia that often degrade into indistinct mounds, Hasalar retains a level of spatial clarity that suggests either an environmental advantage or a form of material knowledge that has not yet been fully reconstructed. The anthropomorphic figurines, particularly the female forms, introduce another layer of complexity, as they are not naturalistic representations, but stylized constructions that emphasize posture and proportion over realism. And the repetition of these forms suggests the presence of a codified visual language, where meaning was embedded in shape, gesture, and proportion rather than written symbols. And without textual records, these objects may have functioned as cultural identifiers, ritual instruments, or carriers of abstract concepts. While their consistency across different occupation layers indicates continuity of meaning, even as other aspects of the settlement evolved. Perhaps the most subtle and revealing mystery lies not in what is present, but in what is absent, because there are no clear palaces, no monumental temples, and no obvious elite residences. Yet despite this absence, the settlement demonstrates organized architectural layouts, standardized ceramic production, and consistent artistic motifs, a level of uniformity that in later civilizations is typically enforced through hierarchical systems, and at Hasalar that hierarchy remains invisible, suggesting either an egalitarian system governed by strong cultural rules or a form of authority expressed through non-material means such as ritual, oral tradition, or symbolic systems that leave little archaeological trace. If knowledge like this existed so early, how much of human history are we missing entirely? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. On the northern coast of Milosh, an island shaped by volcanic fire in the heart of the Aegean Sea, lies a settlement that defies expectations. No towering pyramids, no colossal temples. And yet, Philokopi presents a more unsettling mystery than most monumental civilizations. How did a relatively small island community achieve a level of engineering continuity, artistic sophistication, and maritime integration that rivals far larger Bronze Age powers? Between approximately 3000 and 1100 BCE, Philokopi evolved through multiple phases of occupation, each layer building upon the last. Archaeological estimates suggest sustained habitation for over a millennium, an unusually long continuity for a settlement of its scale. In comparison, even major centers like Troy experienced repeated destruction cycles that reset their urban development, while Philokopi appears to have preserved and adapted its knowledge across generations. The question is not whether it was advanced, but how such advancement was maintained, and why it seems disproportionate to its size and resources. The systematic excavation of Philokopi began in the late 19th century under the direction of the British School at Athens, where early campaigns revealed something unexpected. Instead of a single city, archaeologists uncovered a sequence of superimposed urban phases categorized as Philokopi I through IV. Stratigraphic analysis shows continuous rebuilding over earlier foundations, structural reuse rather than full demolition, and gradual architectural refinement over centuries, while radiocarbon dating and ceramic typology confirm a timeline stretching from the early Cycladic period to the late Bronze Age. Unlike sites that exhibit abrupt cultural breaks, Philokopi demonstrates incremental technological evolution, suggesting a stable transmission of knowledge across generations. This continuity raises a critical question. What mechanisms allowed technical knowledge to persist without clear written records? In its later phases, Philokopi was enclosed by fortifications constructed in the Cyclopean-style massive, irregular stone blocks fitted together without mortar, a technique famously associated with Mycenae. Yet here lies the anomaly. Because Mycenae was a major political and military hub with access to vast labor and resources, while Philokopi was not. Measured blocks at comparable sites often weigh between 2 and 10 metric tons, and although those at Philokopi are generally smaller, their placement still requires coordinated lifting, alignment, and stabilization techniques that imply organized labor and mechanical understanding. The lack of definitive evidence for advanced lifting devices, the absence of quarry infrastructure matching the scale of construction, and the structural precision exceeding what is expected from simple stone tools all contribute to the unresolved nature of these fortifications. When compared to other Bronze Age defensive systems, Philokopi's walls appear functionally excessive, suggesting either a perceived threat not fully understood or a cultural and technological influence imported from more powerful civilizations. Despite limited agricultural potential, Philokopi became a significant node in Aegean trade networks, with its strategic importance tied to obsidian, a volcanic glass sourced abundantly on Milos. Chemical sourcing studies have confirmed that obsidian from Milos reached mainland Greece and Crete as early as the Neolithic period, and at Philokopi archaeologists have identified imported ceramics, Mycenaean cultural influences, and evidence of long-distance exchange across the Cyclades. This implies a sustained maritime network operating across hundreds of kilometers of open sea. Yet there is no evidence of navigational instruments such as compasses, no written maritime charts, and no standardized port infrastructure. Experimental archaeology suggests that Bronze Age sailors relied on celestial navigation, wave patterns, and seasonal wind systems. But the consistency required to maintain such trade over centuries remains difficult to fully explain. Compared to later Mediterranean systems, Philokope's network appears prematurely sophisticated, hinting at a level of maritime knowledge that was never formally recorded. Among the most compelling discoveries at Philokope is the famous flying fish fresco, a vibrant wall painting that has survived for over 3,000 years. And while it visually resembles the frescoes of Akrotiri, closer analysis reveals deeper unanswered questions. Fresco painting involves applying pigments onto wet plaster so that the color chemically bonds with the wall as it dries. A technique that is well understood, yet the longevity and vibrancy of the pigments at Philokope are unusual even by known standards. Scientific observations indicate that the pigments were likely derived from mineral sources, such as iron oxides and copper compounds, that they have remained stable despite exposure to humidity and salt-laden air, and that they show minimal degradation compared to similar aged works. In controlled studies, many natural pigments degrade significantly within centuries under coastal conditions, yet at Philokope the colours remain strikingly intact, suggesting either advanced selection and processing of mineral pigments, specific plaster compositions that enhance chemical bonding, or environmental sealing conditions that are not yet fully understood. However, no definitive experimental reconstruction has successfully replicated the exact durability observed. When compared to contemporaneous art traditions, Egyptian wall paintings often relied on dry pigment application and show different aging patterns, while Minoan frescoes at Akrotiri were preserved largely due to volcanic ash burial, a protective condition that Philokope lacks, making its preservation more difficult to explain. This leads to a deeper and more provocative question. Did Bronze Age artisans possess a more refined understanding of material chemistry than modern archaeology currently assumes? Philokope does not follow the rigid grid systems seen in cities like Mohenjo-Daro, yet its layout is far from random, as spatial analysis reveals consistent access routes between key areas, functional zoning of residential and communal spaces, and efficient use of terrain and elevation. This suggests a form of adaptive planning in which the city evolves in response to environmental constraints rather than imposing strict geometric order, a concept that modern urban theory would later describe as organic planning. The presence of such planning principles in a Bronze Age settlement challenges assumptions about the development of urban design and indicates that sophisticated spatial reasoning existed long before formalized architectural theory. Perhaps the most profound mystery lies in the continuity of Philokope itself, because over more than 1,000 years the settlement was repeatedly rebuilt on existing foundations, its structural techniques improved, and external cultural influences integrated without disrupting its overall coherence. Despite this, no extensive written records have been found, and unlike civilizations such as those of Mesopotamia that relied heavily on written documentation to preserve technical knowledge, Philokope appears to have transmitted its expertise through apprenticeship systems, oral tradition, and repeated construction practices. Such methods are inherently fragile and typically degrade over time, yet in this case they did not, suggesting an unusually stable system of knowledge transmission that has left behind physical results but no clear explanation of how that knowledge was preserved. What do you think, was Philokope truly advanced beyond its time? Or are we underestimating how capable ancient societies really were? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Temessos is located high in the Taurus Mountains of southern Turkey, more than 1,000 meters above sea level inside what is now Guluk Mountain National Park. Unlike most ancient Mediterranean cities built near rivers, ports, or fertile plains, Temessos was constructed directly into steep mountain terrain, surrounded by cliffs and narrow passes. The city remained largely isolated for centuries, which helped preserve many of its structures almost untouched. European travellers documented the ruins during the 19th century, but systematic archaeological work accelerated during the 20th century. Each expedition revealed something new: massive defensive walls fused with natural rock formations, enormous underground cisterns carved into stone, earthquake-resistant public buildings, intricate drainage systems, and one of the highest ancient theatres ever constructed in Anatolia. Recent surveys using aerial mapping and geological analysis have shown that large portions of the city were engineered directly around fault lines and unstable slopes, something that should have made large-scale urban construction extremely dangerous. Yet much of Temessos still stands after more than 2,000 years. That is where the real mystery begins. The greatest mystery surrounding Temessos is not who built it. It is how they built it at all. The city sits between roughly 1,000 and 1,200 meters in elevation. Even modern mountain construction requires heavy machinery, stabilized roads, cranes, and constant transport infrastructure. Yet the people of Temessos managed to create an entire urban center in terrain where simply walking is difficult. Archaeologists estimate that some retaining walls and fortifications contain stone blocks weighing several tons each. Moving material uphill through narrow mountain paths would have required enormous manpower and logistical coordination. Unlike places such as Petra, where many structures were carved directly into softer sandstone, Temessos relied heavily on transported limestone blocks assembled on uneven mountain slopes. This creates a major engineering problem. A modern construction crew facing the same terrain would normally cut large access roads into the mountain before transporting material, but many of the ancient access paths at Temessos are too narrow even for animal caravans carrying massive loads. Some historians believe temporary wooden ramps and pulley systems were used. Others suggest that much of the stone was quarried locally from the mountain itself. But even that explanation does not solve the deeper issue: constructing stable foundations on fractured, sloped rock at high altitude. The city should have suffered catastrophic collapses. Instead, many structures remained standing for centuries. In 333 BCE, Alexander the Great advanced through Anatolia during his campaign against the Persian Empire. Historical accounts describe how he approached Temessos, but ultimately abandoned the assault. That decision alone transformed the city into legend. Ancient sources describe Temessos as nearly impregnable, but the mystery is not simply that it had walls. Many ancient cities had walls. The mystery is how the builders merged military engineering with the mountain itself. Instead of relying entirely on artificial fortifications, the city's defenses exploited gravity, elevation, bottlenecks, and natural cliffs. Certain approach routes forced invaders into extremely narrow passages where defenders positioned above could attack from multiple angles simultaneously. Modern military historians comparing ancient defensive systems often mention similarities between Temessos and medieval mountain fortresses built more than 1,000 years later. That raises an uncomfortable question. How did a mountain city in the Hellenistic world develop defensive concepts so advanced that even Alexander, whose army destroyed cities across 3 continents, considered the cost too high? Some sections of the walls also show evidence of highly sophisticated stone fitting. While not as precise as the polygonal masonry at Sacsayhuaman, the builders clearly understood how to distribute structural pressure along uneven terrain. The city was not simply built on a mountain, it was engineered as part of the mountain. No mystery at Temessos confuses researchers more than water. Mountain settlements face a fundamental survival problem: maintaining stable water supplies through dry seasons. Yet Temessos supported thousands of inhabitants for generations despite lacking a major river. Archaeologists discovered numerous cisterns throughout the city, including underground reservoirs, rainwater collection systems, stone channels, and massive carved storage chambers. Some reservoirs were lined with waterproof plaster that survived more than 2,000 years despite temperature fluctuations, seismic activity, and erosion. Chemical studies of similar ancient hydraulic mortars across the Mediterranean show that certain mixtures contained volcanic ash, lime, and mineral additives capable of creating long-term water resistance comparable to some modern concretes. But Termessos presents an additional complication. The city's altitude exposes it to seasonal freeze-thaw cycles. Water entering cracks should have expanded during cold periods, gradually destroying the reservoirs from within. Yet many remained functional long after the city declined. Researchers still debate whether the builders developed specialized waterproof mixtures adapted specifically for mountain conditions. Others believe the placement of the reservoirs themselves was the real technological achievement, strategically integrated into bedrock zones less vulnerable to stress fractures. Whatever the answer, the water systems at Termessos suggest an advanced understanding of hydrology far beyond what many people associate with ancient mountain settlements. Southern Turkey sits near major tectonic zones. Earthquakes have destroyed entire cities throughout Anatolian history, and yet parts of Termessos survived remarkably well. The theatre is one of the clearest examples. Built directly into the mountainside, it overlooks the valley below from an elevation that feels almost impossible. The seating rows curve with extraordinary precision, despite being anchored into uneven terrain. Modern structural engineers studying ancient theatres have noted that curved seating arrangements naturally distribute force more effectively during seismic stress. In other words, some ancient architectural forms accidentally behaved like primitive earthquake-resistant designs. But at Termessos, the situation appears more deliberate. Drainage channels were cut directly into the terrain to prevent water accumulation beneath foundations. Retaining walls were layered against natural rock instead of fully replacing it. In several locations, builders avoided fighting the mountain and instead shaped the city around geological weaknesses. This is one reason why many structures partially collapsed rather than completely failing. The city absorbed stress instead of resisting it rigidly. That principle is still used in modern earthquake engineering today. The necropolis of Termessos contains massive sarcophagi scattered across dangerous slopes and elevated ridges. Some weigh several tons and were positioned in places that remain difficult to access even now. Their transportation remains one of the site's most overlooked mysteries. Modern archaeologists using terrain analysis have pointed out that certain tombs sit in areas where large wheeled transport would have been nearly impossible. Moving stone blocks uphill across fractured limestone without modern roads would have required sophisticated coordination systems involving ropes, rollers, wooden sledges, and large labor forces. What makes the mystery more striking is the precision of the carving. Many sarcophagi display detailed relief work and carefully balanced proportions despite being transported through terrain capable of damaging even unfinished stone. Some historians compare the logistical challenge to moving sections of the stones used at Machu Picchu, except here the terrain involves steep Mediterranean mountain ridges instead of broad Andean terraces. The deeper researchers study the necropolis, the more the city begins to resemble an industrial-scale engineering operation hidden inside the mountains. Do you think Termessos was simply an extraordinary mountain city, or evidence that some ancient civilizations understood engineering far beyond what we usually imagine? Share your thoughts in the comments below. On the northwestern coast of Libya, facing the blue waters of the Mediterranean Sea, the ruins of Sabratha rise from the sand with a level of precision that feels deeply unsettling. Columns still stand in near-perfect alignment. Underground drainage systems continue to function after more than 15 centuries, and inside collapsed villas and temples, Thousands of microscopic stone fragments still form images so detailed that archaeologists sometimes compare them to paintings rather than mosaics. Sabratha is usually introduced as a Roman trade city, but that explanation feels incomplete the moment you begin looking closely at the engineering hidden beneath the ruins. Because this was not simply a wealthy coastal settlement, it was a city constructed with an obsessive degree of organization, mathematical balance, and technical refinement that appears strangely disproportionate to the tools officially available at the time. What makes Sabratha disturbing is not one isolated mystery, it is the accumulation of them. The city was first established by Phoenician traders around the 6th century BCE, before later becoming part of the Roman world. Its location made it strategically valuable, positioned between the Mediterranean trade network and caravan routes leading deep into Africa. Yet the modern rediscovery of Sabratha came slowly. For centuries, much of the city remained buried beneath wind-blown sand after earthquakes and abandonment, gradually erased it from view. Major excavations accelerated during the Italian archaeological campaigns of the 1920s and 1930s, revealing theatres, baths, forums, temples, villas, ports, and extensive mosaics preserved in astonishing condition. But the more archaeologists uncovered, the stranger the city became. Unlike many ancient settlements that grew chaotically over time, Sabratha appears unnervingly organized. Streets intersect at calculated angles. Public spaces align with civic structures in ways that maximize movement and visibility. Water systems were integrated directly beneath transportation routes. Even today, satellite analysis shows sections of the urban layout maintaining geometric consistency over surprisingly large areas. Some Roman cities demonstrate planning. Sabratha demonstrates systemization. And nowhere is that systemization more visible than in its theatre. The Roman theatre of Sabratha is often described as one of the best preserved theatres from the ancient world. But preservation alone is not what shocks specialists. It is the complexity of the structure itself. The stage facade rises nearly 3 stories high, covered in marble columns and sculptural decoration arranged with such symmetry that even minor deviations become immediately visible to the human eye. The structure contains an intricate network of backstage corridors, elevated passages, hidden chambers, and acoustic surfaces carefully positioned to project sound toward thousands of spectators. Modern acoustic studies of Roman theatres have shown that some could amplify speech with remarkable efficiency despite lacking electronic enhancement. Yet Sabratha appears to operate at an even higher level of refinement. Researchers analysing comparable Roman theatres found that certain seating geometries naturally reinforced vocal frequencies between roughly 500 and 2000 Hz. Precisely the range most important for human speech, clarity. At Sabratha, the curvature of the cavea and the placement of architectural surfaces suggest intentional acoustic optimization rather than accidental success. That creates a deeply uncomfortable question. Did Roman architects truly achieve this level of acoustic engineering entirely through empirical trial and error? Or were they operating with mathematical principles that are only partially understood today? Because Sabratha repeatedly crosses the line between practical construction and excessive precision, the city's hydraulic systems reveal the same pattern. Excavations uncovered underground drainage networks, built with carefully controlled gradients that allowed wastewater and runoff to move efficiently across large sections of the city without stagnation. Even slight errors in slope would have caused flooding or blockages, yet many channels maintained functional flow dynamics across long distances. Roman engineers are often celebrated for aqueducts and water management, but Sabratha presents an additional mystery: environmental contradiction. The city existed on a coastline vulnerable to salt corrosion, shifting sand, seasonal storms, and seismic instability. Under those conditions, maintaining long-term hydraulic integrity should have been extraordinarily difficult, and yet portions of the system survived for centuries. Comparisons with other Roman coastal cities make the anomaly even sharper. In some Mediterranean settlements, water systems degraded rapidly once maintenance collapsed. But parts of Sabratha's infrastructure endured despite earthquakes and abandonment. Archaeologists studying Roman concrete have discovered that certain ancient marine mixtures reacted chemically with seawater to strengthen over time through mineral crystallization. Samples from Roman maritime structures elsewhere in the Mediterranean revealed formations of aluminum tobermorite, a rare mineral associated with long-term durability. The implication is astonishing. Some Roman builders may have accidentally or intentionally created materials capable of outperforming aspects of modern coastal concrete in longevity. This is where Sabratha stops feeling merely advanced and begins feeling almost impossible. Ancient mosaics are common throughout the Roman world, but the mosaics of Sabratha possess a level of detail that repeatedly forces historians into uncomfortable comparisons with later artistic traditions. Some floors contain tesserae, the tiny stone pieces forming the image cut so small and placed so densely that transitions between color tones appear smooth to the naked eye. In certain sections, shadows, muscle contours, folds of fabric, and facial expressions emerge with astonishing realism. The problem is scale. Many tesserae measure only a few millimeters across. Producing thousands upon thousands of uniform fragments by hand would already require enormous labor. But arranging them with such precision across large surfaces introduces another problem entirely: error accumulation. Even microscopic alignment mistakes compound over distance. Yet, numerous mosaics maintain geometric consistency and visual proportionality across entire rooms. Some archaeologists estimate that highly detailed Roman mosaics could require millions of individual tesserae and years of labor. But labor alone does not explain the precision. The artisans had no magnification devices comparable to modern optical tools, no laser alignment systems, no modern adhesives. And yet some compositions demonstrate spacing control so accurate that the eye struggles to detect irregularity even after nearly 2,000 years. One mosaic in particular continues to attract fascination because of its illusionistic depth. Human figures appear almost volumetric under angled light. The effect resembles techniques associated with Renaissance painting more than traditional floor decoration. Scholars usually attribute this to extraordinary craftsmanship. But that answer sometimes feels too convenient, because the question is not whether skilled artists existed. The question is how such consistency was maintained physically across enormous surfaces without modern precision instruments. And Sabratha is not isolated in this phenomenon. Similar high-detail mosaics appear in places like Pompeii and Antioch, but Sabratha stands apart for the density of preservation and the environmental conditions under which those works survived. Heat, salt air, earthquakes, moisture fluctuations, and centuries of abandonment should have destroyed much of this detail. Yet many sections remained intact beneath the sand like sealed time capsules. That preservation introduces another unresolved mystery. Why was the city abandoned so completely in the first place? Historical records mention earthquakes during the 4th century CE, economic decline, Vandal invasions, and Byzantine reconquest. All likely contributed to instability. But no single event fully explains the city's gradual disappearance from major historical relevance. Trade cities rarely vanish cleanly. Strategic ports are usually reoccupied, rebuilt, or absorbed into later systems. Sabratha instead faded into silence. Even more strangely, many monumental structures were not systematically dismantled for material reuse at the scale historians would expect. In numerous ancient cities, stone blocks were stripped aggressively over centuries by later populations. At Sabratha, parts of the urban landscape remained eerily frozen beneath layers of sand and collapse. It is almost as if the city was interrupted rather than conclusively destroyed. What do you think Sabratha truly represents? A forgotten peak of ancient human knowledge, or evidence that parts of history may have been far more advanced than we realize? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Perched above the Danube River in southern Germany, Huenberg Hill Fort does not behave like a typical Iron Age settlement north of the Alps. It looks imported. Around the 6th century BCE, in a region long assumed to be dominated by loosely organized tribal groups, a fortified urban center emerged with planned streets, social hierarchy, long-distance trade, and most unsettling of all, a defensive wall built not from timber or stone, but from Mediterranean-style mud brick. That single anomaly reframes everything, because mud brick should not survive here, not in this climate, not in this cultural context, and yet the archaeological record shows that it did, forcing a complete re-evaluation of what we think we know about early European societies. Archaeological work at Huenberg began in the 19th century, but systematic excavations intensified in the 20th century under German research institutions, gradually revealing that this was not a simple hilltop fort, but something far more complex. Early digs exposed fortifications and domestic structures, but the turning point came between the 1950s and 1970s, when archaeologists uncovered the now famous mud brick wall, an architectural feature previously unknown in Iron Age Central Europe. As excavations continued into the early 21st century, aided by modern geophysical surveys, the scale of the site expanded dramatically, transforming the interpretation of Huenberg into a settlement covering nearly 100 hectares, with population estimates between 3,000 and 5,000 inhabitants, a figure unusually high for the region and period. Burial mounds scattered across the surrounding landscape, many containing rich grave goods, indicate the presence of a powerful elite tied to long-distance trade networks. While each excavation phase added new layers of complexity, including imported Greek ceramics and amphorae, clear evidence of craft specialization, such as metallurgy and textile production, structured urban layouts divided into functional zones, and monumental fortifications that stand apart from anything else known north of the Alps, reinforcing the conclusion that Huenberg was not peripheral but central, not primitive but organized, and not isolated but connected. The most controversial and technically puzzling feature of Huenberg is its fortification system, constructed around 600 BCE, consisting of a stone foundation topped with sun-dried mud bricks and finished with a layer of white lime plaster, a method strongly associated with the Mediterranean region rather than Central Europe, where fortifications of the same era typically relied on timber-laced earthworks or dry stone construction. From the perspective of material science, the choice of mud brick appears fundamentally flawed for the upper Danube climate, where annual precipitation often exceeds 800 to 1,000 millimeters, and seasonal freeze-thaw cycles accelerate material degradation, especially in unfired clay structures composed of clay, silt, sand and organic temper such as straw, which inherently possess limited compressive strength and poor resistance to water erosion. In Mediterranean environments, where rainfall averages between 500 and 700 millimeters annually, mud brick can endure for long periods with maintenance, but under Central European conditions, its survival should be significantly reduced. And yet, Archaeological evidence indicates that the Huneberg Wall remained functional long enough to serve as an effective defensive structure. One possible explanation lies in the application of lime plaster, which acts as a semi-permeable barrier, reducing direct water penetration while allowing internal moisture to evaporate, thereby slowing structural decay. But what makes Huneberg exceptional is not merely the use of this technique, but its consistent and deliberate implementation, suggesting a level of engineering awareness rather than trial and error experimentation. Comparisons with Mediterranean sites, including Greek colonial settlements such as Massalia, reveal conceptual similarities in construction, yet the distance between these regions spans hundreds of kilometers, crossing multiple cultural boundaries, making simple imitation unlikely. Instead, the adaptation observed at Huneberg implies that the builders not only acquired foreign knowledge, but understood it well enough to modify it for a harsher environment, transforming a fragile material into a viable defensive system. This raises a deeper and still unresolved question: whether this knowledge arrived through direct contact, the movement of skilled craftsmen, or a more complex network of technological exchange that has left no written trace, leaving behind only the physical evidence of a system that should not work but did. The outer surface of the fortification was coated in white lime plaster, creating a visually striking structure that would have stood out dramatically against the surrounding landscape, potentially visible from great distances along the Danube corridor. And while its practical function likely involved protecting the mud brick core from environmental damage, its uniform appearance suggests that it also carried symbolic meaning. In many early urban societies, monumental architecture serves not only defensive purposes but also communicates power, organization, and permanence. And comparative analysis with Mediterranean settlements shows that whitewashed walls were often associated with elite or sacred spaces, implying that Huneberg's fortifications may have functioned as both a physical barrier and a visual declaration of authority. This dual role transforms the wall from a simple engineering solution into a statement and intentional projection of identity, suggesting that the builders were not only solving environmental challenges, but also shaping perception, turning the settlement into a focal point of political and cultural influence. Material evidence confirms that Huneberg was integrated into extensive long-distance exchange systems, as demonstrated by the discovery of imported goods from ancient Greece, including fine ceramics and amphorae used for transporting wine and oil, which appear in quantities suggesting sustained and repeated contact rather than isolated encounters. The Danube River likely functioned as a major trade artery, linking Central Europe with Mediterranean markets. But while the movement of goods is well documented, the transfer of knowledge remains more difficult to prove directly. Nevertheless, the architectural evidence at Huneberg strongly implies that technological ideas traveled alongside physical objects. The presence of Mediterranean-style construction techniques in combination with imported artifacts suggests that interaction went beyond trade, potentially involving itinerant craftsmen, diplomatic exchanges among elites, or the deliberate adoption of foreign innovations. Although no written sources survive to explain the mechanism, leaving archaeologists to reconstruct these connections solely through material remains and comparative analysis. The scale and organization of Huneberg challenge long-standing assumptions about the nature of Iron Age societies north of the Alps, as the settlement exhibits characteristics typically associated with early urbanism, including a large population, spatial planning, economic specialization, and hierarchical social structure, all of which distinguish it from smaller and less organized contemporary sites in the region. With an estimated population of several thousand inhabitants and a surrounding landscape structured by elite burial mounds and satellite settlements, Huneberg appears to function as a central hub within a broader socio-economic system, prompting some scholars to propose that it may correspond to Pyrene, a city mentioned by the Greek historian Herodotus, although this identification remains speculative. Regardless of its exact historical identity, the site clearly demonstrates that the level of complexity achieved by Celtic societies during this period has been underestimated, requiring a reassessment of their technological capabilities and cultural interactions. Hoynberg ultimately forces a reconsideration of technological boundaries in the ancient world by presenting a case in which a community located far from traditional centers of innovation not only adopted foreign construction techniques, but successfully adapted them to local environmental conditions, raising a series of unresolved questions that continue to challenge modern scholarship. Why was mud brick chosen despite its apparent disadvantages in a high moisture climate? What specific modifications allowed it to endure? Who possessed the expertise required to implement and maintain such a system? And why does this level of architectural sophistication appear so rarely in the surrounding region? These questions point toward a broader issue, suggesting that technological exchange in the ancient world may have been more complex and more widespread than previously assumed, involving networks of knowledge transmission that are only partially visible through the archaeological record. So, what do you think? Was this knowledge imported, or something far more advanced lost to history? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Within the Sonoran Desert of southern Arizona, about 80 kilometers south of modern-day Phoenix, stands the massive 4-story structure of Casa Grande ruins, a building that should not have survived, rising from one of the harshest desert environments in North America, where summer temperatures regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius and seasonal floods can erase entire settlements. The structure has endured for more than 700 years. No steel, no concrete, no wheeled transport, no draft animals. Just compacted desert soil engineered so effectively that parts of the building have outlasted many medieval stone structures from Europe. Even today, archaeologists still debate how the Hohokam civilization managed to construct and maintain such a technologically advanced settlement in the middle of an unforgiving desert landscape. The first documented European encounter with Casa Grande came in 1694, when Jesuit missionary Father Eusebio Kino traveled through the region and described a great house abandoned among the desert plains. Serious archaeological investigation did not begin until the late 19th century. In 1892, archaeologist Frank Hamilton Cushing conducted one of the earliest scientific studies of the site and discovered extensive irrigation canals surrounding the ruins. Later excavations throughout the 1900s revealed platform mounds, ball courts, residential compounds, shell jewelry from the Gulf of California, copper bells likely imported from Mesoamerica, and evidence of a massive regional canal network. Every excavation expanded the mystery. Casa Grande was not an isolated structure. It was part of an enormous, engineered desert civilization. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding Casa Grande is the material itself. The structure was built primarily from caliche, a hardened natural cement made from desert soil rich in calcium carbonate. Modern engineers know caliche is notoriously difficult to work with because it cracks under thermal stress and erodes rapidly under moisture exposure. Yet the walls of Casa Grande, some more than 1 meter thick, remained stable for centuries despite extreme temperature fluctuations between day and night. Researchers studying the internal composition found that the Hohokam did not simply pile mud together. The material appears carefully layered and compacted in stages, almost like primitive poured concrete. Some archaeologists estimate the Great House required thousands of tons of material moved and shaped entirely by human labor. The engineering challenge becomes even more astonishing when considering the environment. The Sonoran Desert experiences temperature swings capable of destroying weak earthen architecture within decades. Many adobe settlements from later centuries across the American Southwest deteriorated rapidly without constant repair. Casa Grande survived more than 7 centuries. In modern materials science, thermal mass construction is considered one of the most efficient passive cooling systems ever developed. Thick walls absorb heat during the day and slowly release it at night, stabilizing interior temperatures. Casa Grande appears to exploit this principle with remarkable sophistication long before thermodynamics existed as a scientific discipline. Some researchers argue that the Hohokam may have developed construction knowledge through centuries of experimentation, eventually creating one of the most durable adobe structures ever built in North America. Inside the structure, archaeologists discovered strategically placed windows and ventilation openings that continue to puzzle researchers. Some openings appear positioned specifically to channel airflow through the building during seasonal wind changes. Others align with solar positions during solstices and equinoxes. During certain times of year, sunlight passes through narrow openings and illuminates specific interior walls with surprising precision. This has led some researchers to propose that Casa Grande functioned partly as an astronomical observatory. Similar solar alignments are found in ancient structures such as Chaco Canyon and Machu Picchu, where architecture was linked directly to celestial cycles. What makes the Casa Grande alignments controversial is the level of accuracy involved. To calculate solar positions across multiple seasons without modern instruments would require decades of systematic observation. The Earth's axial tilt changes the sunrise position throughout the year, meaning even small construction errors could ruin the alignment. Some archaeologists argue the alignments may be coincidental because portions of the building have collapsed over time. Others counter that there are too many consistent alignments for chance alone to explain them. If intentional, the Hohokam possessed an advanced understanding of solar movement comparable to far larger ancient civilizations. Some researchers also believe these alignments may have served agricultural purposes. In a desert society dependent on irrigation, accurately tracking seasonal changes could determine planting schedules and water distribution cycles. If true, Casa Grande may have functioned as both a ceremonial and scientific structure simultaneously. But the most extraordinary achievement of the Hohokam civilization was not the Great House itself, it was water. Casa Grande existed in a region where annual rainfall averages less than 30 centimeters. Agriculture on a large scale should have been nearly impossible. Yet excavations revealed one of the largest pre-industrial irrigation systems ever discovered in North America. The Hohokam constructed hundreds of kilometers of canals, some over 20 meters wide and several meters deep, stretching across the desert floor with astonishing precision. Modern hydraulic engineers studying these canals found something deeply surprising. The slope gradients were carefully controlled to maintain stable water flow. If the canals were too steep, erosion would destroy them. If too shallow, water would stagnate. Maintaining a functional gradient over tens of kilometers without laser surveying equipment or metal tools is extraordinarily difficult even by modern standards. Some canal segments deviated by only a few centimeters per kilometer. This level of precision suggests sophisticated surveying methods archaeologists still do not fully understand. Satellite imagery and aerial mapping later revealed that the canal system connected multiple Hohokam settlements into a vast agricultural network. Some researchers estimate the system irrigated tens of thousands of acres of farmland. Crops such as maize, beans, squash, and cotton supported a large regional population centuries before European arrival. The scale rivals irrigation achievements seen in ancient Mesopotamia and parts of the Nile Valley despite being developed independently in the deserts of North America. Archaeological discoveries also revealed evidence of long-distance trade. Marine shells from the Pacific coast, macaw feathers from Mesoamerica, and copper artifacts suggest the Hohokam participated in a trade network spanning hundreds or even thousands of kilometers. This challenges the outdated assumption that prehistoric North American societies were technologically isolated or primitive. Casa Grande may have been a major regional center connected to wider cultural systems across the southwest and northern Mexico. Some artifacts discovered near the site resemble objects found in Mesoamerican civilizations, leading researchers to debate whether cultural exchange influenced Hohokam engineering and astronomy. The discovery of bull courts near Hohokam settlements strengthened these theories. Similar structures were common in ancient Mesoamerican societies, where ritual ball games held political and religious significance. Although direct connections remain debated, the similarities suggest Casa Grande existed within a far more interconnected ancient world than previously believed. Yet perhaps the greatest mystery is how everything collapsed. Around the 15th century, the Hohokam settlements surrounding Casa Grande were abandoned. There is little evidence of catastrophic warfare. No mass graves, no burn destruction layers large enough to indicate sudden invasion. Climate studies using tree ring data suggest the region experienced prolonged droughts during the late medieval period, including mega droughts capable of devastating agricultural systems. But drought alone may not explain the near-total disappearance of such a sophisticated engineered society. Some researchers believe the irrigation network itself became too complex to maintain. Large canal systems require enormous labor coordination. Sediment buildup, flooding, or minor infrastructure failures can trigger cascading collapse across entire agricultural regions. Once the system destabilized, food production may have failed rapidly. Others suggest social fragmentation, resource exhaustion, or changing trade patterns weakened the civilization over generations. What do you think really caused the collapse of the Hohokam civilization climate disaster? The failure of their massive canal system, or something we still haven't discovered yet? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Steep cliffs and dry stone valleys of the Zagros Mountains in northern Iraq surround Rabbana Merkuli, a massive ancient fortress city that many archaeologists believe belonged to the Parthian Empire more than 2,000 years ago. What makes this place terrifyingly mysterious is not simply its size, but its impossible location. Entire defensive walls stretch across mountain ridges more than 1,000 meters above sea level. Massive stone structures cling to slopes so steep that even modern engineers would struggle to transport materials there without heavy machinery. Yet somehow ancient builders created a fortified city capable of housing soldiers, storing water, controlling trade routes, and surviving in one of the harshest terrains in the Middle East. For centuries, almost nobody knew the true scale of Rabbana Merkuli. From the ground, the ruins blended into the mountains themselves. But once drones, satellite imagery, and aerial surveys were used in the 21st century, archaeologists realized the site was far larger and more sophisticated than previously believed. Suddenly, what appeared to be scattered ruins became evidence of one of the most strategically engineered mountain fortresses of the ancient world. The first modern observations of the site were made during surveys in Iraqi Kurdistan in the late 20th century, but the terrain made systematic excavation extremely difficult. Early explorers only identified scattered stone walls and isolated ruins. At first, researchers believed the site was merely a small military outpost. Later expeditions revealed something much larger. Archaeologists discovered defensive walls stretching nearly 4 kilometers across mountain slopes. This changed the interpretation completely. Rabbana Merkuli was no minor outpost. It was a fortified city controlling a major corridor through the Zagros Mountains. As excavations continued, researchers uncovered stair systems carved directly into bedrock, watchtowers positioned at strategic choke points, and enormous gateways designed to restrict enemy movement. Drone mapping later showed that the fortress used the natural mountain itself as part of its defense network, reducing the need for artificial walls while maximizing visibility across surrounding valleys. One of the most shocking discoveries came when researchers identified giant rock reliefs near the entrance. These carvings, likely depicting a Parthian ruler, suggested the site may have held political or ceremonial importance in addition to military value. The reliefs also proved the fortress was likely connected directly to elite Parthian authority rather than local tribal occupation. Further studies identified evidence of water management systems, reservoirs, and channels carved into rock. This discovery raised one of the greatest mysteries surrounding Rabanna Merkeli. How did an ancient civilization maintain a large population on a dry mountain fortress with limited natural water access? The walls of Rabanna Merkeli are among the most puzzling aspects of the site. Many sections were built directly along unstable slopes and rocky ridges. Some surviving walls still stand several meters high despite more than 2 millennia of erosion, earthquakes, and weather exposure. Modern geological analysis suggests the builders intentionally selected stable bedrock zones to anchor the walls. In several areas, the stone blocks appear fitted to irregular mountain surfaces with surprising precision. Unlike the perfectly cut polygonal stones seen at Sacsayhuaman, Rabanna Merkeli relied on a hybrid system combining natural cliff formations with reinforced masonry. This allowed the fortress to absorb stress from shifting terrain more effectively than rigid wall systems. Some archaeologists compare the engineering logic to later medieval mountain fortresses, yet Rabanna Merkeli predates many of them by centuries. Even more mysterious is the logistics problem. Transporting stone, tools, timber, and supplies up steep mountain paths would have required an enormous workforce and highly organized planning. There is still no consensus on how the Parthians managed construction on such terrain without advanced lifting technology. Perhaps the greatest technical mystery is water. Rabanna Merkeli sits in a region where summer temperatures can exceed 40 degrees Celsius, while rainfall remains highly seasonal. A fortress city housing hundreds or possibly thousands of people would have required enormous water reserves. Excavations revealed reservoirs and channels integrated directly into the mountain landscape. Researchers believe rainwater collection played a major role, but the scale of the system suggests more advanced hydraulic planning. Some channels appear angled with precise gradients, allowing water to move through gravity-fed systems similar to those used by the Nabateans at Petra. Hydrologists studying the region estimate that maintaining a population of even 1,000 people would require tens of thousands of litres of water per day when accounting for drinking, food preparation and animals. The existence of such infrastructure suggests the builders understood long-term water storage, seasonal flow patterns, and possibly even methods for minimizing evaporation. What remains unexplained is how these systems were maintained on steep mountain terrain for extended periods. Some channels were cut directly into rock surfaces at elevations difficult to access even today. Near the entrance to the fortress stand enormous rock carvings etched into vertical cliff faces. These reliefs are believed to depict a ruler wearing Parthian royal attire. Their presence raises several mysteries simultaneously. First, why place ceremonial carvings in such a difficult location? Second, how were they created? The cliff faces are steep and dangerous. Creating large-scale carvings there would have required scaffolding systems, rope access, or suspended platforms. Yet almost no physical evidence of such construction methods survives. The precision of the carvings is also remarkable. Despite weathering, researchers can still identify folds in clothing, facial proportions, and symbolic royal elements. This suggests highly trained artisans working under controlled conditions in an environment where even standing safely would have been difficult. Some historians believe the relief served as psychological warfare. Anyone approaching the fortress would immediately encounter gigantic royal imagery carved into the mountain itself, reinforcing the authority of the Parthian state before invaders even reached the gates. Rabbana Merkli may not have been purely military. The fortress overlooks critical routes through the Zagros Mountains connecting Mesopotamia to the Iranian plateau. These mountain corridors were essential for trade, troop movement, and political communication across the Parthian Empire. Archaeologists believe the site may have functioned as a strategic checkpoint controlling caravans moving through the mountains. If true, Rabbana Merkli was part fortress, part administrative centre, and part logistical hub. This theory is supported by the scale of the site. The fortress covers roughly 40 hectares, far larger than many isolated military outposts. Some researchers estimate that maintaining such a complex would have required organised taxation, food distribution, and permanent administrative personnel. In this sense, Rabbana Merkli resembles ancient mountain control centres such as Masada, though its engineering approach appears even more integrated with the surrounding terrain. One of the strangest mysteries is historical silence. Despite its massive scale and strategic importance, Rabbana Merkli is barely mentioned in surviving ancient texts. No detailed historical records describe its construction, destruction, or abandonment. This absence has led to multiple theories. Some believe the fortress was abandoned gradually as trade routes shifted and Parthian power declined. Others suggest conflict with the Roman Empire may have destabilized the region. Another possibility is that the fortress simply became too expensive to maintain once centralized authority weakened. But the lack of written documentation remains deeply unusual. A fortress city with walls stretching across mountainsides should have appeared prominently in regional records. Instead, Rabbana Merkli vanished into the landscape for centuries. What do you think was the greatest mystery of Rabbana Merkli? The impossible mountain construction, the hidden water system, or the fortress disappearing from history almost completely? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. A forgotten Maya city hidden in the humid lowlands of Tabasco, Mexico, contains one of the strangest engineering mysteries in the ancient Americas. Comalcalco was built not from giant limestone blocks like most Maya cities, but from millions of fired bricks, a construction method so unusual that some archaeologists once compared it more to ancient Roman engineering than traditional Maya architecture. In a civilization famous for stone pyramids, Comalcalco became the Maya world's impossible brick city. Even stranger, many of its walls still stand after more than 13 centuries inside one of the wettest tropical environments in Mesoamerica. Unlike cities such as Chichen Itza or Tikal, Comalcalco was located in a region with very limited building stone. The surrounding lowlands were dominated by clay-rich soil, rivers, mangroves, and tropical rainforest. Most ancient civilizations facing this problem simply built smaller settlements using wood or packed earth. But the people of Comalcalco attempted something far more ambitious. They industrialized brick production on a massive scale. Archaeologists estimate that some major structures at the site required hundreds of thousands of bricks. Many of these bricks were fired at temperatures between 700 and 900 degrees Celsius, hot enough to dramatically increase hardness and resistance to moisture. Maintaining such temperatures consistently in a humid tropical climate would have required enormous quantities of fuel and carefully controlled firing conditions. Yet the remains of large-scale kiln systems have never been fully identified. That absence has become one of the site's greatest mysteries. The engineering challenge becomes even more impressive when considering the climate itself. Tabasco receives over 2,000 millimeters of rainfall annually, in some regions far more than many famous archaeological zones in Mexico. Modern brick structures in tropical conditions often deteriorate rapidly without chemical sealants or reinforced concrete. But portions of Comalcalco's walls, stairways, and temple platforms have survived for over 1,300 years. Some structural sections still retain remarkably straight alignment, despite centuries of erosion, earthquakes, vegetation growth, and humidity. Part of that durability may come from the city's strange mortar formula. Chemical analysis revealed that the Maya builders mixed crushed oyster shells with lime and organic compounds to create an extremely resilient binding material. This shell-based mortar hardened through a calcium reaction process, somewhat comparable to hydraulic lime systems used in parts of the Roman world. Researchers have pointed out that both civilizations independently discovered ways to create water-resistant building compounds long before modern cement chemistry existed. What makes Comalcalco especially fascinating is that the Maya were never known as a brick-building civilization on this scale. Roman architecture relied heavily on standardized bricks because the empire possessed advanced logistical systems, road networks, and centralized labor organization. The Maya, by contrast, are usually associated with carved limestone monuments shaped by hand. Yet Comalcalco reveals evidence of large-scale material standardization. Thousands of bricks were produced in near-identical dimensions, suggesting organized production methods rather than isolated handmade construction. Even more mysterious are the markings carved into the bricks themselves. Over 4,000 engraved bricks have been documented at the site. Some contain glyph-like symbols, geometric signs, animal figures, handprints, or abstract marks whose meanings remain unknown. A number of archaeologists believe these markings may have functioned like production stamps, identifying work groups, artisans, or construction phases. If true, this would imply a level of labor management rarely associated with Maya cities. Some markings appear almost industrial in nature. Certain bricks carry repetitive symbols arranged in patterns that resemble batch indicators or placement codes. Similar systems appeared in ancient Mesopotamia and Roman construction centuries later, or in entirely different regions of the world. The possibility that the Maya independently developed organized production tracking systems has sparked major debate among researchers studying pre-Columbian engineering. The city's structural design also raises difficult questions. Large brick pyramids face serious load distribution problems because bricks can crack under uneven pressure far more easily than monolithic stone blocks. Modern engineers note that tall brick structures require careful balancing of weight transfer and compression forces, yet many of Comalcalco's surviving foundations still maintain stable geometry after centuries of partial collapse. This suggests the builders understood how to distribute enormous structural loads through layered brick arrangements and thick mortar cushioning. Another unresolved mystery involves the site's white stucco surfaces. Several temples and sculpted masks were coated in an exceptionally fine lime plaster that reflected sunlight intensely across the tropical landscape. Under sunlight, parts of the city may have appeared almost luminous. Microscopic analysis shows extremely smooth finishing techniques with very fine particle control. Reproducing the same finish today using only ancient tools and materials remains extremely difficult. Some researchers believe the reflective stucco may have also served thermal purposes. White mineral coatings can reduce solar heat absorption, helping structures remain cooler under intense tropical temperatures. If intentional, this would suggest the Maya at Comalcalco possessed sophisticated environmental adaptation knowledge integrated directly into architecture. Trade adds another layer to the mystery. Despite its swampy location, Comalcalco became connected to major Mesoamerican exchange networks. Archaeologists discovered obsidian from central Mexico, jade from Guatemala, marine shell artifacts, and evidence of cacao trade. Transporting these materials across dense wetlands and river systems would have required highly organized logistical routes. Some historians believe Comalcalco functioned as a major commercial gateway between the Maya world and the Gulf Coast. The cacao connection is especially important. Tabasco's climate was ideal for cacao cultivation, one of the most valuable luxury commodities in ancient Mesoamerica. Cacao beans were sometimes used almost like currency among elite trade systems. This economic importance may explain how Comalcalco funded such an enormous architectural experiment despite its difficult environment. Yet perhaps the biggest mystery remains the simplest question of all. Why did they choose fired brick in the first place? Most archaeologists argue that the lack of nearby stone forced the population to innovate, but others point out that the scale and precision of Comalcalco's brick production goes far beyond simple adaptation. Producing millions of bricks required labor coordination, fuel management, temperature control, material standardization, transportation systems, and long-term architectural planning. In many ways, it resembles a technological divergence within the Maya civilization itself, almost as though Comalcalco followed a completely different path of engineering evolution. The city reached its peak between the 6th and 9th centuries AD, during the late Classic Maya period, when major urban centers across Mesoamerica were flourishing. Then, like many Maya cities, it declined and was eventually abandoned. The reasons remain uncertain. Environmental pressure, political instability, trade disruption, warfare, or resource exhaustion may all have played roles. But unlike many ruined Maya cities swallowed completely by jungle, Comalcalco left behind something unique, evidence that ancient American engineering may have been far more diverse and experimental than historians once believed. What do you think Comalcalco really was? Simply a clever adaptation to a harsh environment, or evidence of a forgotten engineering breakthrough far ahead of its time? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. On the rocky outskirts of Amman, Rouge Al Malfouf looks almost insignificant from a distance, a small circular stone tower rising from dry hills. But for archaeologists, the structure has become one of the strangest architectural mysteries in Jordan. Its walls are unnaturally precise for an ancient dry stone structure. Its circular geometry shows surprisingly low construction error, and after nearly 2,000 years of earthquakes, erosion, and extreme desert temperature shifts, much of the tower still stands. The site was first documented during archaeological surveys around Amman in the 20th century, when expanding urban exploration began uncovering forgotten Nabatean and Roman period remains across the region. At first glance, researchers assumed it was a simple watchtower. But as measurements and structural analysis continued, the tower began raising questions far beyond military architecture. One of the biggest mysteries surrounding Rouge Al Malfouf is its almost perfectly circular construction. Ancient builders usually preferred rectangular or polygonal layouts because straight walls are easier to align and stabilize. Circular masonry is far more difficult. Every stone must follow a continuously shifting angle, and even small geometric errors become amplified as the structure rises. Yet at Rouge Al Malfouf, the curvature remains remarkably consistent. Surveys of surviving sections suggest deviations are surprisingly small, considering the tower may date back nearly 2 millennia. Archaeologists studying ancient Near Eastern construction methods have pointed out that creating such geometry without modern measuring equipment would have required advanced practical understanding of radial alignment, tension distribution, and load balancing. This becomes even more mysterious when compared to other ancient circular structures. At Brock of Musa, Iron Age builders created massive circular towers using dry stone engineering, but those structures relied on extremely thick walls and inward cobelling for stability. Meanwhile, at Gossek Circle, Neolithic builders demonstrated astronomical precision through circular earthwork alignments. Rujam al Malfouf appears to combine aspects of both geometric precision and durable stone engineering despite being much smaller and less famous. What confuses researchers even more is the masonry itself. Many stones were fitted together without mortar. Dry stone construction is common in ancient architecture, but circular dry stone towers are structurally unstable unless the stones are carefully balanced. Modern structural engineers explain that curved walls create lateral pressure that constantly tries to push the structure outward. Without correct weight distribution, collapse becomes inevitable over time. But Rujam al Malfouf survived centuries of environmental stress. Jordan experiences major temperature fluctuations between day and night, especially in semi-arid terrain. Surface stone can expand significantly during intense daytime heat and contract rapidly after sunset. Over hundreds of years, this thermal cycling normally weakens masonry joints and fractures stone surfaces. Studies on ancient limestone structures in the Levant show repeated thermal expansion can create microscopic cracks that eventually destabilize entire walls. Yet large sections of the tower remain standing. Some researchers believe the builders intentionally selected specific stone densities and shapes to absorb stress more effectively. Others argue the circular design itself distributed mechanical forces more evenly than rectangular towers of the same period. There's also evidence that certain stones may have been shaped with greater precision than expected for the region and era. Tool marks on some blocks suggest controlled cutting rather than random breakage. This has led to debates about the quality of iron tools available to local builders during the late Nabatean or early Roman period. The Nabateans were already famous for engineering achievements elsewhere in Jordan. At Petra, they created elaborate hydraulic systems capable of storing millions of litres of water annually in one of the driest regions on Earth. Archaeologists estimate Petra's water network included dams, ceramic pipelines, cisterns, and filtration systems advanced enough to support tens of thousands of inhabitants. Because of this, some scholars believe Rujam al Malfouf may represent another example of underestimated Nabatean engineering knowledge. However, the structure differs dramatically from most known Nabatean architecture. Petra emphasized monumental facades carved directly into cliffs, while Rujam al Malfouf relies on compact geometric stone assembly. This difference has led some historians to suspect the tower may preserve an older local architectural tradition later reused by Nabateans or Romans. Another major mystery involves the actual purpose of the structure. The traditional explanation identifies it as a watchtower guarding trade routes approaching ancient Ammon, known historically as Philadelphia during the Greco-Roman period. The surrounding hills provide wide visibility across nearby terrain, making military observation plausible. But the interior dimensions create problems for this theory. The tower appears too compact for long-term military occupation. There is limited evidence of storage, defensive infrastructure, or permanent troop presence. Unlike Roman frontier towers found along the Limes Arabicus, Rujam al Malfouf lacks extensive associated fortifications. This has encouraged alternative theories. Some archaeologists believe the structure may have had ceremonial or astronomical significance. The entrance orientation and light penetration patterns inside the tower have attracted particular attention. During certain periods of the year, sunlight enters the opening at highly specific angles, illuminating portions of the inner wall in unusual ways. Although no definitive astronomical alignment has been proven, the possibility recalls ancient structures elsewhere in the world where solar positioning played a central role. At New Grange, winter solstice sunlight penetrates a narrow passage and illuminates an inner chamber with extraordinary precision. At Chankalo, 13 towers constructed more than 2,000 years ago functioned as a solar observatory capable of tracking annual sunrise movement. If Rujmal Malfuf also incorporated solar observation, it would suggest that even relatively small regional structures in Jordan may have encoded astronomical knowledge that has not yet been fully recognized. Another overlooked feature is the tower's thermal behavior. Visitors and researchers have repeatedly noted cooler interior temperatures compared to the surrounding environment during hot seasons. This may sound simple, but passive cooling in desert climates requires careful architectural planning. The circular geometry reduces wind resistance and may create subtle pressure differences around the structure. Thick stone walls also act as thermal mass, absorbing heat slowly during the day and releasing it gradually at night. Similar principles appear in ancient Persian desert architecture such as the Yakchal, where passive cooling systems preserved ice in extreme heat centuries before electricity existed. Some engineers studying historical climate adaptation suggest Rujm al-Malfuf may unintentionally demonstrate advanced environmental optimization. Even without theoretical physics, generations of builders could have refined designs through observation and experimentation over centuries. Perhaps the most unsettling part of the mystery is how little historical documentation survives. No surviving inscription clearly identifies the builders. No surviving manuscript explains the tower's purpose. Archaeologists are left reconstructing its story almost entirely through stone geometry, structural analysis, and environmental context. This absence of written evidence creates a historical void, and within that void, the tower becomes more than a forgotten ruin. It becomes evidence of how much ancient technical knowledge may have disappeared completely. Do you think Rujm al-Malfuf was really just a watchtower? Or could it have served a much more advanced purpose that history has completely forgotten? Share your thoughts in the comments below. In the scorching frontier between ancient Egypt and Nubia, near the second cataract of the Nile in what is now northern Sudan, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a fortress that should not have existed at its time. Buin was not merely a military outpost. Buried beneath desert sands for nearly 4,000 years, the site revealed defensive engineering, industrial organization, and construction precision so advanced that many researchers compared parts of it to fortification systems that would not become common again until the medieval world. Long before Roman frontier forts or European castles, Buin already possessed layered defences, massive fortified walls, hidden attack corridors, organised military zoning, and industrial workshops operating in one of the harshest environments on Earth. The first major discoveries at Buin accelerated during the 20th century when the construction of the Aswan High Dam threatened to drown ancient Nubia beneath the waters of Lake Nasser. Archaeologists rushed into the region before entire cities vanished underwater forever. Early excavations revealed thick mud brick fortification walls resting on carefully engineered stone foundations. As researchers dug deeper, they uncovered towers, gate complexes, storage facilities, workshops, streets, barracks, and evidence of highly centralized planning. Every new excavation layer made the site look less like a primitive Bronze Age settlement and more like a fully engineered military machine. Further discoveries shocked historians even more. Archaeologists found that the fortress covered nearly 13,000 square meters and was protected by walls up to 5 meters thick in some areas. Outside the walls stood a deep defensive ditch carved directly into bedrock. Defensive bastions projected outward at calculated angles, allowing soldiers to attack invaders from multiple directions simultaneously. Some gateways forced attackers into narrow turns, where shields became ineffective and movement slowed dramatically. Military historians later noted that similar concepts appeared in medieval castles almost 2,000 years later. The more researchers studied Buchan, the stranger it became. The fortress was built primarily during the reigns of Senusret II and Senusret III around the 19th century BCE, a period when most Bronze Age fortifications elsewhere in the world were relatively simple. Yet Buchan displayed astonishing geometric consistency. Towers were evenly spaced. Defensive sightlines overlapped with remarkable accuracy. Wall thicknesses followed consistent engineering patterns. Streets inside the fortress appeared deliberately planned instead of evolving naturally over centuries. This raised one of the greatest mysteries surrounding the site. How did ancient engineers achieve such mathematical precision with the limited tools of the Bronze Age? At Buchan, archaeologists found evidence suggesting advanced surveying techniques. Some researchers proposed that Egyptian engineers may have used rope-based geometry systems combined with astronomical observations to align structures. However, reproducing the exact consistency of the fortress using only known Bronze Age methods remains extremely difficult. Experimental archaeology demonstrated that even small measurement errors over long distances would eventually distort wall alignments. Yet Buchan maintained impressive structural order across large sections of the complex. The defensive ditch created even more controversy. Portions were cut directly into hard bedrock with striking straightness and controlled depth. Bronze chisels and stone tools are theoretically capable of cutting rock, but the sheer scale of excavation at Buchan presents enormous logistical problems. Researchers calculated that removing such quantities of stone using only hand tools would have required a vast labour force, working under strict coordination for extended periods. Some estimates suggest thousands of workers may have participated during peak construction phases. The engineering challenge becomes even more astonishing when considering Buchan's environment. Temperatures in Nubia frequently exceed 40 degrees Celsius during summer. Supplying food, water, tools and construction materials to a massive workforce in such conditions would have required extraordinary organisational capabilities. Yet excavations revealed evidence that the Egyptians not only maintained the fortress successfully, but operated it continuously for generations. One of the most fascinating discoveries at Buchan involved industrial activity inside the fortress itself. Archaeologists uncovered copper processing workshops containing furnace remains, slag deposits, and evidence of large-scale metallurgy. This suggested Buchan was not only a military installation, but also an industrial centre connected to wider trade and resource networks across Africa. Producing copper in the ancient world required temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. Maintaining such heat demanded carefully designed furnaces, large amounts of charcoal fuel, and precise airflow control. In a desert frontier environment where wood resources were limited, sustaining industrial metallurgy at scale becomes difficult to explain. Some researchers believe the Egyptians developed highly efficient fuel management systems that remain poorly understood today. The logistics behind Buchan continue to puzzle historians. Researchers estimate the fortress may have housed more than 1,000 soldiers, workers, administrators, and support personnel during its peak occupation. Massive storage chambers and granaries discovered inside the walls suggest long-term planning for sieges and supply disruptions. The organisation resembles later Roman military forts more than early Bronze Age settlements. Trade evidence uncovered at the site deepened the mystery further. Archaeologists found imported goods, seals, ceramics, and materials originating from distant regions. Buchan appeared to function as a heavily controlled checkpoint between Egypt and Nubia, monitoring trade routes along the Nile. Some historians now believe the fortress was part of a much larger economic strategy, designed to dominate gold trade, ivory transport, and African resource networks. Another major mystery involves Buin's relationship with the Nile itself. The fortress stood near dangerous cataracts where river navigation became difficult. Some excavated structures suggest protected access routes to water sources during times of siege. Researchers discovered partially hidden passages and carefully positioned walls near the riverbank, though much of the evidence disappeared before complete excavation could occur. Certain engineers studying the site proposed that Buin's builders possessed an advanced understanding of Nile flood behaviour. Defensive walls appear positioned to resist erosion and seasonal water pressure over long periods. Considering the unpredictability of the Nile in ancient times, this implies generations of accumulated environmental observation and hydraulic knowledge. Even the location of the fortress raises difficult questions. Buin occupied a naturally defensive position overlooking critical sections of the Nile corridor. However, some structural alignments appear too deliberate to be purely practical. A number of researchers suggested possible astronomical orientations connected to seasonal solar positions or navigation references used by Nile travellers. While these theories remain debated, they add another layer to the growing mystery surrounding the fortress. Comparisons with other ancient military sites only make Buin appear more unusual. Many Bronze Age fortifications in Mesopotamia, Anatolia, or the Levant relied on simpler perimeter walls and less integrated defensive systems. Buin, by contrast, combined layered military architecture, industrial infrastructure, environmental adaptation, and centralized planning into a single coordinated complex. What do you think was the greatest mystery behind Buin Fortress? Its impossible engineering precision, its advanced military design, or the industrial systems hidden in the desert? Share your thoughts in the comments below. In the ruins of Lixus, near the Atlantic coast of modern Morocco, archaeologists uncovered something that looked less like an ancient city and more like an industrial zone from a lost civilization. Massive stone vats lined in geometric rows, drainage channels engineered with precise gradients, waterproof coatings still intact after nearly 2,000 years of exposure to salt, bacteria, and ocean air. This was not a palace or a temple. It was one of the largest garum factories ever built in the Roman world, a place where fermented fish sauce became a luxury product, shipped across an empire stretching over 5 million square kilometres. But the deeper researchers looked into Lixus, the stranger the site became, because many of the engineering techniques used there still are not fully understood today. The ruins of Lixus were first systematically explored during the 19th and early 20th centuries, though local populations had known about the site for centuries. French and Spanish archaeologists later uncovered enormous industrial complexes overlooking the Lucos River estuary. At first, researchers believed the structures were simple storage basins, but chemical residue analysis revealed something unexpected: concentrated fish oils, marine proteins, and salt crystals embedded deep into the walls of the vats. The site had once processed garum, the famous Roman fermented fish sauce sometimes described as the ketchup, soy sauce, and luxury seasoning of the ancient Mediterranean combined into one product. Ancient texts from writers like Pliny the Elder describe garum as extraordinarily expensive. Some premium varieties sold for prices comparable to fine perfumes. Yet what shocked archaeologists was not the existence of garum itself, it was the scale. Lixus appears to have operated more like a proto-industrial food processing centre than a traditional ancient workshop. Excavations revealed dozens of interconnected fermentation tanks arranged in highly organised production lines. Some vats measured more than 4 meters long and nearly 2 meters deep. Researchers estimate that during peak operation, the factories may have processed several tons of fish per day. That creates the first major mystery. industrial food production normally requires sophisticated logistics. Fresh fish begins decomposing within hours, especially under the North African sun where summer temperatures can exceed 35 degrees Celsius. Without refrigeration, delays would destroy entire batches. Yet isotopic studies and fishbone analysis suggest Lixus handled enormous quantities of migratory Atlantic species, including tuna and mackerel, likely harvested seasonally in coordinated fishing operations. Some historians now compare the system to an early form of industrial-scale supply chain management. Even more puzzling is the engineering of the vats themselves. Garum production was chemically brutal. Fish entrails mixed with high concentrations of salt create an environment rich in enzymes, ammonia, organic acids, and corrosive compounds. Modern food processing plants often require stainless steel or specialized polymer linings to survive such conditions over long periods. Yet many vats at Lixus remain structurally intact after nearly 2 millennia. Microscopic analysis of the waterproof coating revealed that it was far more complex than ordinary lime plaster. Some samples contain unusually dense mineral bonding structures similar to hydraulic Roman concrete, but with significant compositional differences. Researchers identified traces of silicates, volcanic ash components, and crystalline mineral formations capable of reducing water penetration. In certain sections, scientists even observed microcrystalline growth inside tiny fractures, a phenomenon resembling the self-healing behaviour discovered in some Roman marine concretes. This is where the mystery deepens. Morocco has no major local volcanic source comparable to the Italian regions where Roman pozzolanic concrete originated. If specialized volcanic materials were imported, they would have required transport across hundreds or even thousands of kilometers. Why invest so heavily in advanced industrial coatings for fish sauce production? And more importantly, why did many of these material techniques disappear after the fall of Rome? The site also raises difficult questions about ancient biological knowledge. Garum was produced through controlled decomposition. Fish parts were layered with salt and left to ferment under the sun for weeks or months. If salt concentration was too low, dangerous bacterial contamination could occur. If too high, enzymatic breakdown would slow dramatically. Yet ancient producers consistently created stable products safe enough to export throughout the empire. Some researchers believe Roman manufacturers possess sophisticated empirical knowledge of fermentation chemistry. Certain vats at Lixus differ in size and depth, suggesting separate production methods for different grades of garum. Chemical residue studies detected traces of herbs, shellfish compounds, and multiple fish species within individual vats. This implies that recipes were highly controlled rather than random mixtures. The most mysterious aspect may be the true formula of premium garum itself. Ancient authors repeatedly described elite garum as having extraordinary flavour complexity. Some Roman aristocrats paid immense sums for sauces imported from specific regions, especially Spain and North Africa. Yet no surviving ancient text provides an exact industrial recipe. The formulas are frustratingly vague, mentioning fish, salt, and sunlight, while ignoring the precise ratios, fermentation timing, or biochemical techniques involved. Archaeologists at Lixus discovered smaller isolated vats positioned away from the main industrial areas. Some researchers suspect these may have been used for high-grade experimental batches reserved for elite export markets. Organic residue analysis suggests that not all vats process the same material. Some contain higher concentrations of omega-rich fish oils and aromatic botanical compounds, while others show evidence of longer fermentation periods. Modern experimental archaeologists attempting to recreate ancient garum have encountered a surprising problem. Reproducing the flavour profiles described in Roman texts is extraordinarily difficult. Even when using similar fish species and salt ratios, modern reconstructions often fail to achieve the same chemical balance. This has led to speculation that Roman producers may have manipulated fermentation conditions with far greater precision than previously believed. One controversial theory suggests that ancient manufacturers unintentionally created highly concentrated glutamate compounds, natural flavour enhancers chemically similar to modern MSG. Fermentation breaks proteins into amino acids, especially glutamic acid, which produces the umami taste associated with soy sauce, Parmesan cheese, and fermented seafood. Laboratory tests on reconstructed garum samples revealed glutamate levels surprisingly close to some modern fermented condiments. If true, Roman producers may have mastered biochemical flavour engineering nearly 2,000 years before the scientific discovery of amino acids. But there is another unresolved problem. Garum factories should have been unbearable places. The decomposition of fish in massive quantities produces overwhelming odour and dangerous bacterial activity. Yet Lixus contained nearby residential and ceremonial districts, surprisingly close to the industrial zone. Some archaeologists now believe the city's layout exploited Atlantic wind currents to disperse fermentation gases away from populated sectors. The vats were positioned to maximise ocean airflow, functioning almost like passive industrial ventilation systems. Several drainage channels also appear carefully angled to remove contaminated liquids rapidly before stagnation could occur. Hydrological simulations performed on reconstructed sections of the site suggest remarkably efficient wastewater movement for an ancient industrial complex. This level of engineering is difficult to dismiss as accidental. The drainage systems themselves contain another mystery. Roman engineers are famous for aqueducts and baths, but Lixus demonstrates similar hydraulic precision inside a food processing facility. Channels maintain subtle gradients optimized to prevent organic buildup while minimizing erosion of the surrounding masonry. Some sections even include layered waterproof linings separate from the vats themselves, suggesting engineers understood the long-term corrosive effects of salt-rich waste. Today, many parts of Lixus remain only partially excavated. Satellite imaging and ground surveys indicate additional buried industrial sectors may still exist beneath the layers of sediment. Some historians believe the visible ruins represent only a fraction of the original production network. Do you think the engineers of Lixus possessed industrial knowledge far ahead of their time? Or are modern historians still underestimating ancient technology? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The site of Zominthos was not uncovered as a grand, obvious ruin rising from the landscape. Instead, it emerged gradually from beneath layers of soil and collapsed stone during systematic excavations initiated in the 1980s by Greek archaeologist Yannis Sakelarakis. Located on the slopes of Mount Ida in central Crete, at an elevation approaching 1,200 meters above sea level, the site immediately challenged established assumptions about the spatial logic of the Minoan civilization. Early excavation campaigns revealed a surprisingly extensive architectural footprint. What began as a small exposed structure expanded into a complex exceeding 50 rooms, arranged along organized corridors and axes rather than random accretion. Subsequent seasons uncovered evidence of multiple construction phases, suggesting long-term occupation rather than temporary use. Stone walls preserved to significant heights indicated that the building once rose to at least 2, possibly 3 stories, an extraordinary feature given both the era and the environmental constraints. Artifacts recovered from different excavation layers further complicated interpretation. Large storage vessels, known as pithoi, implied surplus accumulation. Loom weights pointed to textile production. Fine ceramics, tools, and ritual objects suggested a hybrid space neither purely domestic nor purely ceremonial. Unlike lowland centres such as Knossos, which are clearly embedded in agricultural and maritime networks, Zominthos appeared isolated, yet functionally sophisticated. Each excavation phase added detail but not clarity. Instead of resolving its purpose, the site deepened the central question: why construct such a complex system at an altitude where environmental pressures are significantly higher and logistical access is severely limited? The architectural features of Zominthos reveal a level of planning that contradicts its geographic context. The terrain of Mount Ida is not naturally suited for large-scale construction. Slopes are uneven, soil stability varies, and exposure to wind and seasonal temperature fluctuations increases structural stress. Yet the builders created a stable, load-bearing complex with thick stone walls and carefully aligned rooms. Archaeological measurements show that some wall segments exceed 1 meter in thickness, indicating intentional design for vertical load distribution. This aligns with the hypothesis of multi-story construction, supported by stair remnants and collapsed upper-level materials. The precision of stone fitting, while not as finely cut as later classical masonry, still demonstrates controlled shaping and placement, minimizing structural gaps. Comparatively, other Bronze Age structures at similar technological levels rarely exhibit this combination of elevation, scale, and complexity. In Mesopotamia, for instance, urban centers such as Ur developed horizontally across flat floodplains. In Egypt, monumental architecture like pyramids relied on river transport systems for material movement and logistical support. Zominthos, by contrast, lacks both flat terrain and navigable water systems. This suggests that the builders possessed not only technical knowledge of construction mechanics, but also a willingness to apply it in conditions where the cost-to-benefit ratio appears unfavorable. The question is not whether they could build such a structure, but why they chose to do so here. The internal evidence from Zominthos resists simple classification. Textile production indicators, including loom weights and spindle whirls, point toward organized manufacturing activity. Storage containers suggest accumulation and redistribution of goods. Yet spatial layouts, particularly larger central rooms and symmetrical arrangements, mirror patterns associated with ceremonial or administrative functions. The proximity to Mount Ida adds another layer of interpretation. In Minoan belief systems, high-altitude locations were often linked to religious practices, and the mountain itself is associated in later Greek mythology with the upbringing of Zeus. This raises the possibility that Zominthos functioned as a ritual center integrated with economic activity. However, combining production and ritual at this scale in a remote environment introduces logistical contradictions. Production centers typically require efficient access to raw materials and distribution routes. Ritual centers, while sometimes remote, do not usually maintain extensive industrial infrastructure. Zominthos appears to operate as a hybrid system, one that integrates economic, symbolic, and possibly administrative roles. Such a model does not fully align with known Minoan site typologies, suggesting either a specialized function or a broader organizational framework that remains poorly understood. Among all unresolved questions, the problem of transportation stands as the most technically challenging. Constructing a multi-room, multi-story stone complex at an elevation of approximately 1,200 meters would have required the consistent movement of heavy materials over steep and uneven terrain. To estimate the scale of this challenge, consider that even a modest stone block weighing 200 to 500 kilograms would require coordinated labor to transport uphill. If the structure contains hundreds or thousands of such stones, the cumulative logistical effort becomes enormous. Unlike Egyptian construction, where the Nile provided a low-friction transport corridor, or Mesopotamian cities built near resource zones, Zominthos offers no obvious natural advantage. No clear archaeological evidence has yet confirmed the existence of engineered roads leading directly to the site. This absence is critical. In other ancient contexts, such as Roman mountain routes, even minimal infrastructure leaves detectable traces, graded paths, retaining walls, or compacted surfaces. At Zominthos, such features remain either undiscovered or ambiguous. Several hypotheses attempt to address this gap. One possibility is the use of seasonal transport strategies. During colder months, harder ground conditions or even limited snow cover could reduce friction, allowing sled-like movement of materials. However, this would require precise timing and coordination, as well as knowledge of seasonal environmental behavior. Another hypothesis involves distributed labor networks. Rather than transporting large stones in single movements, smaller components could have been moved incrementally and assembled on site. Yet this contradicts the presence of larger structural blocks that appear integral rather than composite. A third possibility is the existence of ancient mountain pathways that have since eroded or been obscured by geological processes. Crete is tectonically active, and erosion over thousands of years could erase surface evidence of infrastructure. If such routes existed, they would imply a broader network of high-altitude movement than currently documented. Experimental archaeology provides some comparative context. Studies on stone transport in pre-industrial societies suggest that teams of 10 to 20 individuals can move loads of several hundred kilograms over short distances using ropes, wooden sleds, and rollers. However, scaling this up to sustained operations across steep gradients introduces exponential increases in difficulty. The transportation problem at Zominthos is not merely a question of effort. It is a question of system design. It implies planning, resource allocation, and possibly technological adaptations that have left minimal trace. In this sense, the absence of evidence becomes part of the mystery itself. If a complex like Zominthos required this level of planning, labor, and engineering in such an inhospitable location, what was important enough to justify it? And more importantly, what kind of system could sustain it? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Near the eastern shore of Lake Victoria in western Kenya stands Thimlik Ohinga, a massive stone fortress built without cement, without steel, and without modern engineering. Some walls rise over 4 meters high and have survived centuries of rain, erosion, and ground movement. The greatest mystery is not who built it, but how these dry stone walls still refuse to collapse. Amen. Local communities had known about Thimlik Ohinga for generations, but the site entered formal archaeological study during the 20th century under British colonial surveys in Kenya. Major academic investigations expanded in the 1980s and 1990s, eventually revealing that the structure was not a single enclosure, but part of a vast network of stone settlements spread across the Lake Victoria region. At first glance, Thimlik Ohinga resembles a smaller African version of Great Zimbabwe. The walls are made entirely from stacked stones without mortar, concrete, or metal reinforcement. Some sections exceed 4 meters in height and more than 1 meter in thickness. What makes this extraordinary is the environment itself. Western Kenya experiences intense seasonal rainfall, fluctuating temperatures, soil movement, and erosion. Modern unreinforced walls exposed to similar conditions often crack within decades, yet parts of Thimlik Ohinga have remained standing for several centuries. Archaeologists estimate that constructing the complex required moving thousands of stones, many weighing over 100 kilograms. Unlike Roman engineers, the builders left behind no written plans, no inscriptions, and no evidence of advanced metal tools. everything appears to have been accomplished through pure understanding of gravity, pressure, and stone balance. The site covers several thousand square meters and includes multiple defensive rings, livestock enclosures, narrow corridors, and internal habitation zones. This was not a primitive pile of rocks. It was a carefully engineered defensive system. This is the question that fascinates engineers the most. Unlike modern walls that rely on cement to hold materials together, Thimlico-Hinga depends entirely on structural geometry. The builders used a technique now recognized in engineering as dry stone interlocking. Every stone transfers pressure into neighboring stones, distributing weight across the entire structure instead of concentrating stress at one point. The walls are not perfectly vertical. Many lean slightly inward, a technique similar to battered walls used in ancient fortifications across the Mediterranean. This inward angle lowers the center of gravity and allows the wall to resist outward collapse. More importantly, most walls are curved rather than straight. Curved walls distribute force more efficiently, exactly like arches and domes in Roman engineering. Modern structural studies show that curved dry stone walls can absorb vibration and shifting pressure significantly better than flat walls. This raises an uncomfortable question for historians. How did a society with no formal mathematics or written engineering manuals discover principles that modern structural engineers still use today? Even more puzzling is the wall flexibility. Because no mortar locks the stones rigidly together, the structure can slightly shift during ground movement instead of cracking catastrophically. This is remarkably similar to the earthquake-resistant stonework of Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman, where stones move minimally during seismic activity and then settle back into place. Several geological surveys around Lake Victoria indicate periodic soil expansion and contraction caused by seasonal moisture cycles. A rigid structure would eventually fracture under these conditions, yet the flexible architecture of Thimlico-Hinga may actually have allowed it to survive longer than early cement-based construction. Some researchers argue that the builders learned these techniques through centuries of experimentation. But there is a major problem with this explanation. Archaeologists still cannot find the intermediate stages showing how the engineering evolved. The technology appears surprisingly mature from the moment it enters the archaeological record. One of the strangest aspects of Thimlico-Hinga is what lies beneath the walls, almost nothing. Modern structures of similar mass typically require deep foundations to prevent sinking and collapse. But many sections of Thimlico-Hinga were built directly onto stable bedrock or compacted ground with minimal excavation. The builders appear to have understood local geology extremely well. Large stones were placed at the bottom to distribute weight broadly, while smaller stones filled gaps and locked the structure together. This created a semi-flexible wall capable of absorbing stress instead of resisting it rigidly. Today, dry stone engineering experts sometimes describe this principle as controlled movement. Ironically, some modern concrete systems fail precisely because they are too rigid. The same principle appears in ancient Andean construction, thousands of kilometers away in South America, yet there is no evidence of contact between these civilizations. Two completely separate cultures may have independently discovered the same structural solution to environmental stress. Thimlico-Hinga was not simply a village, it was a fortress optimized for survival. The entrances are unusually narrow, often allowing only one person to pass at a time. Attackers entering the structure would be forced into confined pathways where defenders held the advantage. Many corridors curve sharply, limiting visibility and slowing movement. From above, the layout resembles layered defensive rings similar to later military fortifications. The central enclosure likely protected livestock, one of the most valuable resources in the region. In many East African societies, cattle represented wealth, survival, and social status. Protecting them was equivalent to protecting an entire economy. Researchers believe the walls also helped defend against predators such as hyenas and lions, which were far more common in the region centuries ago. This means the fortress was engineered to resist both human and environmental threats simultaneously. Perhaps the most underestimated mystery is logistics. Even if the engineering principles are understood, moving the stones remains difficult to explain. Some rocks likely originated from sources outside the immediate construction zone. Transporting thousands of heavy stones across uneven terrain without wheeled vehicles would have required enormous coordination. Experimental archaeology suggests that moving a single 200-kilogram stone using ropes and wooden rollers could require multiple workers. Multiply that by thousands of stones, and the labor demands become staggering. This mirrors ancient construction mysteries seen at Baalbek and Puma Punku sites, where the greatest puzzle is often not carving the stones, but transporting them. The final mystery may be the strangest of all. Why did this engineering tradition disappear? Many ancient technologies evolve into later architectural systems. Roman arches influenced Europe for centuries. Inca masonry techniques survived in modified forms long after the Spanish conquest, but large-scale dry stone fortress construction around Lake Victoria declined dramatically. Something interrupted the transmission of this knowledge. Conflict, migration, political change, or environmental shifts may have caused the engineering tradition to fade. What remains today is a silent structure of stone, one that still challenges assumptions about what small ancient societies were capable of achieving, without modern tools, mathematics, or written science. What do you think caused the incredible construction technology of Thimlik-o-Hinga to disappear from history? Was it war? Environmental change? Or is there still another hidden secret waiting to be discovered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. In the far north of South Africa, near the borders of Zimbabwe and Botswana, a sandstone hill rises above the dry Limpopo Valley. On its summit once stood Mapungubwe, a forgotten African kingdom that mastered gold with astonishing precision nearly 800 years ago. Long before European ships reached southern Africa, this civilization was already connected to global trade routes stretching from China to the Middle East. But the deeper archaeologists looked, the stranger Mapungubwe became. The site was officially rediscovered in 1932 by local farmer and explorer Van Graan, after stories of a hidden hill filled with ancient treasures circulated through the region. Archaeologist Leo Fouché later led the first formal excavations. What they uncovered would permanently change African archaeology. At first glance, Mapungubwe does not resemble famous ancient capitals like Machu Picchu or Petra. There are no gigantic temples or colossal statues. Yet beneath its relatively modest ruins was evidence of something many historians once believed impossible in southern Africa during the 13th century. A highly stratified kingdom with advanced metallurgy, international trade, centralized political authority, and engineering knowledge sophisticated enough to sustain thousands of people in an unforgiving environment. The first major mystery is the hill itself. Mapungubwe Hill rises roughly 30 meters above the surrounding plain, with steep natural sandstone cliffs acting almost like defensive walls. Archaeologists discovered that the ruling elite lived on the summit while commoners lived below one of the earliest clear examples of class-based spatial separation in sub-Saharan Africa. That alone was historically shocking, but the logistics behind it are even more difficult to explain. The Limpopo Valley is semi-arid. Summer temperatures often exceed 35 degrees Celsius, and rainfall is unpredictable. Maintaining a permanent elite settlement on top of a rocky hill would have required organized food storage, controlled access to water, labor coordination, and political stability. Estimates suggest the wider Mapungubwe population may have reached between 5,000 and 10,000 people during its peak around AD 1220-1290. Supporting a population of that scale in such an environment would have been an immense engineering challenge. Yet archaeologists still have not found infrastructure proportional to the kingdom's apparent complexity. There is no massive reservoir system comparable to Roman cisterns, no extensive irrigation canals like those of Mesopotamia, no monumental hydraulic network like the Maya. The kingdom clearly functioned, but many of the systems that sustained it remain archaeologically invisible. And then there is the gold. The most famous artifact from Mapungubwe is the golden rhinoceros of Mapungubwe, a small ceremonial sculpture created around the 13th century. At first glance, it appears simple, but under closer examination, it becomes one of the most technically unsettling artifacts ever discovered in southern African archaeology. The rhinoceros was constructed using extremely thin sheets of hammered gold wrapped around a carved wooden core. To create it, artisans had to understand mining, smelting, hammering, shaping, cutting, and joining delicate metallic surfaces without tearing them apart. Even modern metalworkers acknowledge how difficult it is to consistently produce ultra-thin gold foil without advanced temperature control and highly refined techniques. Some of the gold sheets recovered at Mapungubwe are thinner than 1 millimeter. Producing material at that level requires remarkable control over force distribution during hammering. Too much pressure fractures the metal. Too little accomplishes nothing. Ancient craftsmen somehow mastered the balance. The deeper mystery is that the archaeological evidence for the industrial process behind this craftsmanship is surprisingly limited. Researchers have discovered furnaces, crucibles, slag, ironworking debris, and traces of metallurgical activity across the region. But the scale of surviving infrastructure does not seem to match the sophistication of the finished gold objects. Unlike ancient Egypt, where massive mining and smelting operations left behind extensive industrial scars, Mapungubwe's metallurgical footprint appears comparatively subtle. That creates a difficult question. How did a kingdom with relatively limited visible industrial infrastructure achieve such precision in gold production? Some researchers believe Mapungubwe's metallurgists may have used highly specialized small-scale furnaces capable of reaching temperatures above 1,000 degrees Celsius. Experimental archaeology has shown that charcoal-fired furnaces using forced air bellows can theoretically achieve these temperatures, but maintaining stable heat long enough to refine gold efficiently requires deep practical knowledge of airflow, fuel density, ore composition, and thermal behavior. This becomes even more impressive when compared to contemporary Europe. In many rural parts of 13th century Europe, goldsmithing was still concentrated among small elite workshops with limited precision tools. Yet, artisans in Mapungubwe were producing ceremonial gold objects with astonishing symmetry and delicate structural control in a region once incorrectly assumed to be technologically isolated. The gold itself also raises unresolved questions. Large quantities of gold artifacts have been recovered from elite burials, including bracelets, beads, scepters, and animal sculptures. This suggests access to a major supply network, yet no nearby gold source alone fully explains the kingdom's apparent wealth. Some archaeologists suspect Mapungubwe controlled trade corridors linking inland goldfields with the Swahili coast, turning the kingdom into a strategic redistribution center for precious metals moving toward Indian Ocean markets. And this leads directly into another mystery: global trade. Excavations at Mapungubwe uncovered glass beads from Persia, Chinese celadon pottery from the Song dynasty, imported ceramics, and other luxury goods originating thousands of kilometers away. These were not isolated curiosities. They were part of a functioning international exchange system. For imported Chinese ceramics to reach Mapungubwe in the 13th century, goods would have needed to travel across the Indian Ocean to East African trading ports, then move inland through a vast network of merchants, caravans, political alliances, and controlled trade routes. That implies organizational sophistication on a scale historians once denied existed in southern Africa before colonial contact. Mapungubwe was not isolated. It was connected to the medieval world economy. Its elites likely accumulated power by controlling cattle, ivory, gold, and long-distance commerce. Cattle were especially important. In many African societies, cattle represented wealth, status, and political authority. Archaeological evidence suggests Mapungubwe's rulers managed enormous herds despite environmental limitations. Maintaining such herds in a drought-prone region would have required advanced seasonal planning and territorial control. Then, almost suddenly, the kingdom disappeared. By around AD 1300, Mapungubwe was abandoned. There is no evidence of catastrophic warfare on the scale seen at sites destroyed by invasion, no signs of massive fire destruction, no confirmed epidemic. Instead, the kingdom appears to have declined quietly. Climate change is one major theory. Paleoclimate studies indicate southern Africa experienced increasing aridity during the late 13th century. Reduced rainfall could have destabilized agriculture and weakened cattle-based wealth systems. Another theory suggests trade routes gradually shifted northward toward the emerging power of Great Zimbabwe, which later became the dominant political center in the region. But neither explanation fully resolves the mystery. Civilizations usually leave transitional phases behind evidence of migration, adaptation, or gradual restructuring. Mapungubwe instead seems to fade with unusual silence. A kingdom sophisticated enough to produce advanced gold artifacts and participate in intercontinental trade somehow vanished while leaving behind surprisingly little explanation for how it truly functioned. What do you think was the true source of Mapungubwe's advanced gold technology, lost engineering knowledge, hidden trade networks, or something historians still haven't fully uncovered? Share your thoughts in the comments below.